We're going to deal over the next few days with the theme, the art of living creatively. Sounds like a very popular sort of, I suppose, Norman Vincent Pealish kind of a term. Don't you like that term, Pealish? Actually, what I have to say to you, I'm sure, fundamentally will be old hat. I hope the hat will pinch a little bit, and I hope you might have to keep working with it to make it fit. But this is my goal, to try to help you to understand yourself and to gain a little different experience and involvement with truth and a little different dimension in your awareness of truth. The idea of living creatively is a very important thing in our day. We use this term creativity and creative people and creative living and so forth. It's a term you hear everywhere. And I'm using it especially in the context of a definition given by Rollo May, who says the creative person is the fully functioning person. You see, so often we think of creativity as sort of an explanation of what other people have and an excuse of what we don't have. He's so creative, we say. Oh, I wish I were creative. We say this of people who paint or sing or play the piano or compose or write poetry or write or whatever. Oh, isn't he so creative? And it becomes a kind of a self-indictment. The word creative for most persons is a description of wishful thinking. But I'm thinking in terms of creativity as relating to the wholeness which you are. And creative living is living fully, the fully functioning person. In other words, being in tune with the inner rhythms of your own nature, with the free flow of the process of guidance and life and substance and love and all these wonderful things that we talk about so much, but which are so vitally a part of our lives. It seems to me that one of the great and very significant observations that most of us come to as we get interested in unity is that perhaps, first of all, in our own background, in our own life's experience, we have spent so much time living life from the outside, thinking that life is to be lived out here somewhere. It's what I like to call the begging bowl syndrome. In other words, we have the feeling that you come into life as an empty creature and you're fitted with a little begging bowl in your hand, figuratively. And everywhere you go in life, you're asking for support and help. So as you start out as an infant, you're begging for love from your parents. And your life is, to a certain degree, as we assume at least, and as we say, and as our psychiatrists, I think, erroneously tell us, that our life is influenced and affected and sometimes distorted by the fact that they don't put enough in our begging bowl. So our parents push us out of the nest and send us off to school, and we take our little begging bowls to the educators and say, fill me with ideas, with intellectual knowledge. And then our parents are very wise and are very moral people, and they want our children to have good religious background, so they send us off to Sunday school with our little begging bowls to get religion. Give me religion. Tell me about the Bible. Tell me about the Ten Commandments. And then we are pushed out into life. And we go out into the community and out into the world, seeking success. Give me money, give me the things of life. And then we become involved with people, and then there's this need constantly to get love, and our lives are a quest everywhere for something on the outside. And in a sense, it could be said for most persons that their life is the sum total of what they've accumulated in their figurative begging bowls. That life is what's happened to them. Life is what people have said about them. Life is what they've gained. Life is their possessions, their jobs, the loved ones that they've reared and so forth. But the great and exciting thing that comes with this insight of truth is that we've had it all wrong. That life is lived from the inside. And it really doesn't matter what happens out there. Those things are fine and they're beautiful and they're wonderful and we'll always be involved in them. But the only measure of life, when it comes right down to the point where we're trying to ask ourselves, what is life all about anyway? It's not summed up in terms of what's happened to us or around us, but what's happened in us. And what happens in us is our responsibility. So then we begin to realize that what we've always been seeking in our lives, and sometimes seeking in the wrong way, is, as Browning says, to open out a way whence the imprisoned splendor may escape. So then we get on this beautiful new awareness that life is an inward-out process. The outside is exciting and stimulating, but all that really counts is that we release more of the depth from within us. I think that if we can take some of Jesus' beautiful, powerful concepts and reduce them into the lowest common denominator and put them into language that we can understand, and language that's scientifically as well as academically relevant today, that what Jesus is saying is that the universe is concentrated at a point where you are. You are the activity of the whole cosmos manifesting as you. The Father knows what things you have need of even before you ask, and it is His good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And the kingdom of God is not here or there or up in the sky, it's within you. Within you. Unless we get confused about what that means, he then goes on and gives us a lot of parables. The kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a leaven, like unto seed, like unto this and that and the other. All of them seem to imply a dynamic growth process. And the word heaven itself from the Greek uranos literally means expanding. So it's the expanding dynamic potential of our own God possibility within us. And the whole purpose of life is to expand. I don't mean to expand physically, we do enough of that. But to expand in awareness of ourselves, to expand in our knowledge of life, to expand in our free flow of the divine process. And it's an exciting thing when we begin to catch this insight, this idea. So then we come to understand that this truth that we seek and this truth that we deal so much with, as I was sharing with some of the student ministers this morning, is not a verbalized process. Truth is not words. We work constantly to put into words something that's nonverbal. But truth is a nonverbal reality which is beyond comprehension, but which we're always seeking to know and to release and to express. And ultimately then the goal is to know ourselves as individualized expressions of the divine process flowing through us. Now, there's a fundamental principle I want us to deal with over the next few days. When we first hear it, we'll nod our head and say, that's great, that's beautiful, that's what I've always believed. But I want you to think about it a little bit and run it over in your mind and rehearse it and meditate on it and reflect on it and see if it doesn't pinch a little bit and see if it doesn't challenge you to a new insight. I must say right offhand that the principle, which I refer to as the principle of unitivity, is not totally original. It was pretty much inspired by some thoughts of Thomas Trord. But it goes like this. Wherever spirit is at all, the whole of spirit must be. And because spirit is omnipresent, the whole of spirit must be present in its entirety at every point in space at the same time. Now, the word spirit, of course, is a synonym for God, for divine mind, for heaven, for the universe. You can use any particular term you want. But we'll say it again and think about this. The whole of spirit is present. Wherever spirit is at all, the whole of spirit is present. And because spirit is omnipresent, the whole of spirit must be present in its entirety at every point in space at the same time. Now, this is basically an insight which some would call holism. It may be given many terms. It is what I believe to be the heart and soul of unity. We put it in a simple term, wherever God is, I am. Wherever I am, God is, however you term the thing. But sometimes we say this and we deal with it intellectually, but we do not grasp the whole of this. The whole of spirit is present at every point in space in its entirety at the same time. Not God will hear me if I listen, and if he's in the right mood, and if I use the right affirmation. But God is an allness in which I exist as an eachness. God is the allness in which I exist as an eachness. God is the whole in which I am expressing in part. But even in the partial expression, the whole is always present. This is a fundamental concept that you take for granted if you're involved in any study of biology. The whole is always present in the part. The partial unfoldment of a seed as it grows and unfolds into a plant, no matter where it is along the way, the whole is there. If the whole were not there, it couldn't ultimately become the mature plant, you see. The whole of the adult is present in the baby. If not, where does the adult come from? This is why some say the child is the parent of the adult. The child is that out of which the adult comes. But the whole is always present. The whole in terms of the whole pattern, the whole insight. But when we see this in terms of our relation to God, it's so important to know that talking to God is not a matter of getting down on our knees and trying to get God's attention and trying to bring God close to us, because there's no way God can ever get separated from us. That's something we've always said. There's nowhere where God is not. God is a totality. God is a wholeness, divine mind. Divine mind's not someplace up in the sky. You don't have to work to get into divine mind or work to get divine mind into you. You're in it. You can't get out of it. Wherever you go, you are an activity functioning within the infinite mind of God, and your mind is an activity within the infinite mind of God. So wherever spirit is, the whole of spirit must be. If we can really get this awareness, and I say don't delude yourself right off, oh yeah, that's old hat, I know that. Work with it a while, think about it. Apply it in every area of your metaphysical study, and I think you'll realize that we all have a long way to go in getting this awareness. But once we get this awareness, it will change our whole prayer practice, our whole approach to truth, because suddenly we realize that actually each of us is an activity of wholeness. Each of us is a whole creature. There's nothing more that God can give us that we don't already have, because we've been created in His image likeness. We're created in the infinite mind of God, in the flow of life. It's all there. It's all built in. So the key is, as Browning says, to open out a way whence the imprisoned splendor may escape. To awake thou that sleepest, that Christ may shine upon you. To come to understand what we really are, not what we've seen ourselves as being, what we think of ourselves as being, but to know what we really are. And then to get on with the business of living life from within, which is a continuous process. It's never over. Quite often truth students say, wouldn't it be nice if someday we would get to the place where we feel we finally made it? I'm not sure it would be nice. I don't really know about that. But I know that, to my knowledge, I don't know anybody that's ever gotten to that place. It's a continuous quest. And everywhere we go, we say, well, if I can just get this insight, then I think I'll have it made. But the moment you think you have it made, you're faced with new challenges, new experiences. Life is a changing experience. You go on, and you're always having to dig a little deeper, to grow a little more. And you always find that there's a little more to discover, a little greater breadth and depth of life to experience. That's what life is. Life is a continuous, expanding, unfolding process, and it's not yet manifest what man shall be, the Bible says. So think about this principle of unitivity. We'll come back to it from time to time. And what it actually is telling us is that you are always in God. Now that again is something that's nothing new, I'm sure. You are always in substance. You are always in love. You are always in life. You can't get out of it. There's no way that you can in any way be separated from this process. If you could be taken out of life or out of love or out of substance, then the whole universe would break down, because the universe is whole. It's one. It's a whole cosmic process, and each of us is an integral part within it. Now this universal support, which Jesus puts on the basis of the kingdom of heaven that is within, and it's the Father's good pleasure to give it to you, comes through you and not to you. You see, because we are creatures that evolve physically and evolve emotionally and evolve mentally, and we become so involved with the world around us, we tend to assume that which we seek must come to us. And even when we get into truth, we say, oh yes, now I know truth is what I want, but we still think the truth has to come through us. So we sit in an auditorium like this and we hear great jewels coming from the lips of Eric Butterworth, and it's coming to me. Oh my, if I can just hold on to these things. But what we're seeking doesn't come to us, it comes through us. The only thing that counts in terms of a meeting such as this is what you have left over when you've forgotten everything that happened here. That's what true learning is. That's what education is. When you've forgotten what the teacher said, when you've forgotten what was in the book, when you've forgotten totally everything that you were involved in the educational experience, then what's left? And that's the important thing, you see. If we knew this, we wouldn't be so concerned as we almost are, and I'm just like everybody else, and accumulating notes and books and studying, and I want this, I want that, I need more. And we assume that the spiritual consciousness is a matter of accumulating intellectual precepts and concepts and affirmations and statements and books. No, it's challenging. You go through, like I've recently moved my office, and I've become aware of the problem of how much excess baggage you have, and you look at every little thing, and it's a prized possession, every little note. I've got notes of lectures from people that I'm sure I don't even remember where I heard them, but they're great, and they're things I can't let go of, and that's where I am. And it's unfortunate. But none of these things have anything whatever to do with consciousness. Today, I as a teacher, I as one who is involved as a student in the quest for truth, whenever I'm confronted with a challenge of any kind, it matters not that I'm on the radio, that people love me, that I have published books, that I have certificates, that I come to Unity headquarters and they invite me to speak in this great student center. It matters not. When I face a challenge, I'm left entirely on what I have if all of this were totally gone. What do I have left? What's in consciousness? How do I feel? What is my relationship to life? That's what really counts. So that sometimes when we face the challenges of life, it's a good thing. It's good for us. It's good for us to be face to face with ourselves when none of these things are really so helpful. And it's always sad and tragic. And I've had this experience, as many ministers have, when you're called to someone in sometimes the last days of their life, or an experience that's very difficult when a person thinks that they're on their last legs, and the person feels so sad and so guilty. Because quite often they say, I've studied truth for 30 years. Why can't I use it now? Well, the fact is that the study of truth for 30 years or 40 or 1,000 years has nothing whatever to do with where you are at the particular moment. It can have, but of itself it really doesn't. As a matter of fact, sometimes it can be a millstone. Because so often the experience of the rich young ruler, remember, who came to Jesus and he wanted to be a follower, and Jesus said, go and sell all you have and come and follow me. You can carry that into many different contexts. What he was saying is, forget all you've known, let go of all your learning, let go of your intellectualizations of life, let go of the possessions that you have and the ego that you, after all, you know a lot of things, you've been around and so forth, and you've heard all these lectures and you have certificates and so forth. Let it all go. Just let it all go. Empty yourself of yourself, humble yourself, and know that I of myself can do nothing. And what is left? Nothing except the allness of spirit within you, face to face. And sometimes in the deepest challenging experience of life, as we say, when we're at life's lowest ebb, that's the most creative and most beautiful time for us. Because that's a time when we have nothing left except to reach out and accept life, the wholeness of life. And it can be a very revealing, very painful, but very revealing experience. So it's not all that bad. You see, it's not that, why does this happen to me? Well, the fact is, the very fact that we ask the question, why does it happen to me, indicates why it has to happen to us. Because quite often the why does this happen to me is a case of almost like Job. You remember the story of Job, who was literally shaking his fist at the heavens. How dare you allow this to happen to me? I'm a good man. And usually when we say, why does this happen to me? We're saying, after all this truth I've studied, after all the daily word lessons I've memorized, after all the things I've done, and all the people I've helped, how could this happen to me? What we're really saying is, how could God allow it to happen to me? Well, don't put the blame on me. Don't blame God. It happens to you because that's where you are in consciousness. And it's not a bad thing. It happens to you because maybe that's what you need to remind yourself that you have this tremendous allness within you that is transcendent to all of the things that you think are so important in your life. The lessons, the books, the studies, and all these things. This is not in any way to put down studies or lessons. They're vital and fine. Very beautiful experience in terms of the growth process. But what really counts is what is taking place deep within yourself. They say of people in general that a man or a woman are what they are when they're in the dark. So often in our life we become so involved in a conformity-ridden experience, and we do it almost unwittingly and unconsciously. We are very concerned of what other people think, and so we wear the right styles, and we drive the right cars, and watch the right movies, and read all the bestseller lists to make sure that we read the best books and so forth. All of these things. We do it. It's just a part of the culture in which we live. But what a beautiful thing it is to be able to sit alone in the quiet, in the dark, with nobody around to perform for, and take a good look at ourselves and be able to say, I'm me and I love it. And some people, no matter how much they think they have grown spiritually or metaphysically, still find it very difficult to do this. In some of our retreat activities, we especially involve people in small groups where they get close together, and sometimes have a person sit in the middle of the group long toward the end of the week and have everybody take turns in giving them a very special blessing to love them and bless them and tell them how good they are and how wonderful they are. And it is interesting and somewhat saddening that some of the most, well, let's put it this way, people with the most seniority in the study of truth find it the most difficult to sit there and accept the love of other people, which kind of indicates sometimes that their quest for truth has been an escape, that they've been involved in studying about truth for years, but they've never really come to know themselves. And that's tragic, it's sad. But this shows that we all have a long way to go, certainly. I have, for the last few years, been very inspired by an insight which is not at all new, which was sort of formulated in my little book, In the Flow of Life. And I guess mostly because I'm sort of a curious and sort of discontent kind of a person, I find it very difficult to continue on with the same old theme and the same old insight, so I'm always reaching for something new. And now when I talk about this current book, In the Flow of Life, it's something that basically I was involved with a couple of years ago, and it still is very influential in my life, but I've been kind of moving on in new areas. But it was an insight that had great meaning to me, and it came to me one time when I was giving a series of lessons, I believe, on prosperity. And I can always tell personally when I'm in tune is when my greatest and most powerful insights come to me in the process of giving a talk. Something that was never ever planned or prepared in any way, but it just sort of came. It was an indication that obviously I was sort of in the flow, and it was a growth experience for me. Then I know it's right, and I'm sure at that time that it must be helpful to other people because I'm touching the deep roots in myself. But this time I was talking about affluence. This is a term that I've always loved, and I use the term affluence usually much more than the term prosperity, because I think prosperity, as I see it, has been overworked in terms of the materialism and so forth. And I like affluence basically because its root meaning is free flow. And I've dealt with that for a long time, but suddenly the insight struck me so profoundly and so deeply. And I came away not even knowing what it was that I'd experienced or what it was that had happened to me. But I know I wrote on a piece of paper, I am in the flow of life. And I put it over my desk. And it's still there, incidentally, this scrawly little handwriting. I stuck it on the wall, which you don't do in nice offices, but mine's not a nice office, so I do it. And I look at that from time to time, but this had such a tremendous impact on me. And as these things so often do, you begin to attract all other things. You begin to see somewhat a new insight into the things that Jesus was teaching. And I began to realize that this idea of the flow of life is such a beautiful, dynamic process. And suddenly I began to attract to myself all sorts of supportive corroboration, quotations, and so forth. And I discovered that not only is this not a new insight, but actually it was an insight that was very profoundly articulated by Lao Tzu in ancient China, 6th century BC. And there's a particular phrase of Lao Tzu, or a statement of his, which I find very helpful. He says, "The human spirit has its source in the divine fountain, which must be permitted to flow freely through man. Anyone who flows as life flows has solved the enigma of human existence." And then he says, this person needs no other power. He says, anything is evil that blocks the flow of creative action, and everything is healthy that flows with the universe. Lao Tzu, 6,000 years BC. And I began to realize something that has had a profound meaning to me. He talks about anything is evil that blocks the flow. Sickness is an aberration. We've often thought of evil in terms of the old traditional thought as referring basically to immorality. And oh, how the preachers love to preach against sin. Sin and immorality, this corrupt society. Well, there's nothing wrong with being against immorality. There's nothing wrong with seeking to live a moral life. But basically, man is not simply a moral creature. Man is a spiritual being. And morality that is taken on for the sake of the expediency of living within a moral society is good, it's great and commendable, but has nothing whatever to do with spirituality. Nothing. A person can live a purely moral, upstanding life and still be totally out of the flow spiritually. He lives a moral life because he feels that's the kind of life he ought to live. He owes it to his family, he owes it to his neighbors. It's a sense of obligation. But where is he spiritually? This is why so often we ask the question, and it is often asked of us, how could such a good Christian person suffer so much? A person who's gone to church all their life, or a person who's studied truth all their life, how could they have these challenges, these difficulties? How? Well, the experience itself answers the question. And the questioner indicates something of his own perspective by asking the question. You see, we forget that, as Emmett Fox says, life is consciousness. And we tend to attract to ourselves the kind of experiences, the kind of life, the kind of love relationships that are the outgrowth of our inward awareness. That's fundamental in truth. That's nothing new, you see. So that sin is not just immorality. Immorality is one small tip of the iceberg of sin. But sin is any kind of an aberration of consciousness that blocks the flow of the creative process. Charles Fillmore said it was a sin to be poor. And he believed it. Some people didn't understand that. But what he's talking about is that if you can get into a right or righteous relationship with the divine flow, then affluence will flow freely in your experience. Jesus said, seek first the kingdom and all the things shall be added. Seek first to get into the flow of this expanding process of the divine within you. And then you will experience the good things in life, you see. So that this word sin is very important. And I think of sin in the context of an idea that I've used for years and which has many, many ramifications, which I refer to as the frustration of potentiality. Anything that frustrates the divine potential within you is a sin. Now that broadens it out. Because every time you worry or are anxious or fearful, you frustrate the potential by the very negative aspect of mind, and you frustrate the flow. And the question is, all through our lives, if we live, as so often we do unconsciously, in an outer-centered experience, becoming other-directed in our relationships, then any passing whim of fancy, any changing wind of circumstance, any person having a tantrum, any employer making demands upon us, can totally distort our whole minds. And our life, in terms of thinking, becomes totally involved in the hands of anybody who can disturb me. Anyone. And we say, well, of course I'm disturbed. Of course. Who wouldn't be disturbed if you had this to meet and that to meet and that to meet? Well, that's a good excuse, but it's no reason. The reason you're disturbed is because you're disturbable. The reason you're upset is because you're upsettable. And you're disturbable and upsettable because you are in consciousness out of the flow. Now you may find all sorts of reasons out here. It's because of the administration, it's because of what the congressmen do, it's because of the economy, it's the kind of work I have, it's the neighborhood I live in, it's that so-and-so that lives next door to me, it's the marriage relationship I have, all of these things, but these are all excuses. These are the things that have outwardly manifest in my life as a result of an inward consciousness, but basically in every case, it's that I have somehow frustrated the flow. And the blockage in the flow is not out here. Nobody out here in life can block the flow of the divine process. No one. No one can upset you if you're not upsettable. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee. When your consciousness is in the relationship of the divine flow, then nothing out here can change you. We may have recessions and depressions, but you are always in the free flow of affluence. You may have upheavals and turmoils and wars and rumors of war, but you're always in the context of love and supportiveness and protection, because that's where your inward relationship is, and that's what life is, and as far as I'm concerned, this is what truth is. There is a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty giveth him understanding. Each person has his own unique relationship to the divine flow. I'd like you to visualize something for a moment. This is a nice high ceiling. I was thinking basically in terms of looking up to the rafters of a barn. But this is no barn, but let's look up to the high rafters. And just imagine something we've all seen. A little spider. You can't even see him up there, but gradually he comes down and he comes into your focus when he's way down here in front of you. You've seen this happen, haven't you? And he has this long thread. And he's casually and carefully and serenely unfurling enough of that silky stuff, and he lets himself gracefully to the floor. We were talking about that in a group recently, and we were just kind of wondering if, after he's unfurled all of this long strand, if we could gather it all up and get it back inside of him. That's something a little child would think about. Do you think you could? No, you couldn't. Because within a very few moments, he has spun a strand that's equivalent probably to much more than the total bulk of his body. How? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you, Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Now this is, to me, it's a very beautiful illustration of our relationship to life, to substance, to guidance. We tend to think in terms of limitations. Know the facts. When you have all the facts before you, know what you can do and what you can't do, and then you act within it. Well, if you act within the facts, then the facts will help you that far, but they will settle the issue. The man tells you the facts, and that's the end of the case. But the creative mind doesn't listen to the facts. He transcends facts. Facts are not an ending point, but a starting point. It's a fact that it's impossible for you to get more out of you that is in you. But yet, all of our lives, we're doing this in certain ways all of the time. And we see it in terms of the instinct of animals. How can an animal, how can a bird, how can an eel do the fantastic things they do? Where the bird is spawned up in the northern regions of the Arctic, spawned, I don't know what they say with birds, reared or something or other, and after they have come to a certain point of maturity where they can stay alone, then the parent birds take off and fly direct across the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, down to Central America to a particular place in the jungle, thousands of miles away. And the young birds remain up there in the Arctic regions for several more months until they become strong enough to fly. And then at a given single, who knows why or when, off they go in a great big drove, and they fly, and you've seen them flying sometimes. Often they fly at high altitudes, and this time they fly not across the ocean, because they're not that mature. They fly across the land, and across the mountains, and down the plains. And they go down to Mexico and into Central America, and they go to the same identical jungle and rendezvous with their individual parents. They go to a place they've never been to, never seen, and spot in the midst of hundreds of thousands of birds go right to their own parent bird. How? Consider the lilies of the field. They toil not, neither do they spin. We say of this, oh yeah, but that's instinct. That's instinct. And I say that's also a self-put-down. Many of us feel the only way we can get that kind of guidance is if we get psychic help, if we read the tarot cards, if we get astrological computations, if we get a miracle of God, if something miraculous happens to us. It's all a self-put-down. I'm not saying that miracles don't happen. I'm not saying that you cannot get marvelous insights through psychic involvement and so forth. But I'm saying, why sell yourself short? Every person has his own direct, unique relationship with the infinite process. And if the lilies of the field and the birds of the air and the spiders from the rafters can unfold this beautiful, creative process that transcends anything that we might expect in coming from Him, then certainly how much more capable are you of mobilizing? This is a term which is very helpful. The spider mobilizes the substance. He doesn't just release it because he doesn't have it. He mobilizes it. Mind mobilizes substance, mobilizes guidance, mobilizes life, because we're in it all the time. There's nowhere to go to get it. There's no one specially to give it to you. You're in it. The whole of God is present where you are all the time. There's an inscription on one of the big buildings, I don't know, the National Library, something in Chicago, that says, "For a web begun, God sends the thread." And as Goethe says, only begin it and the mind grows heated. If you start a thing, if you start into action, believing that you can achieve, getting your vision on the goal, working in the consciousness that you're in the flow of life, God sends the thread. Don't worry about where it's going to come from. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough influence. I don't know where to go. I can't possibly do it. All the facts are against me. I'm too old. I'm too young. People say it can't be done. I have this and that and the other factors involved. If you want to live in the framework of those things, fine. It'll be an interesting life. More power to you. A totally circumscribed life. But what a marvelous thing it is to know that man is a dynamic creature, not a static creature. That you're not born into life all fixed in your genes as to what you're going to be. I mean, that's an interesting genealogical thing that actually has no bearing whatever upon you as a spiritual being. You, as a driver of your automobile, are not limited to what is in the automobile. You're limited to your consciousness, to your mind. You're the driver of the automobile. You don't live in a body that is you. You have a body. It's a marvelously provided instrument by which you can live and live creatively and live beautifully. But there's that of you that transcends your body, that of you that can direct your body, that of you that can use your body to the fullest, use it wisely, but that of you that lives vitally and wholly above and beyond the body, even if the body is passed away through death. That of you does not stop living. That of you is lived before the body and after the body, always, eternally, without beginning and without end. The whole of you that is always present. And in that whole of you, there is the dynamic God potential to mobilize and to express and to give releasement to all that you need. Now think of this especially in terms of guidance. One of the things I think that creates more pressure on the consciousness of people and leads to tension as well as stomach ulcers on the part of businessmen is the problem of making decision. Which way do I go? Should I buy? Should I sell? Should I fire the person? Should I keep him on? Should I take this or give up that? Where should I go? Which way? Should I come to the crossroads? Should I turn this way or that way? The high road or the low road? Decisions, decisions, decisions. Multitudes in the valley of decision, says one of the ancient prophets. And we're faced with that all through our lives. And it's a challenge. And we do all sorts of things in trying to find guidance. Usually get advice, which is the greatest evil in the world. The greatest vice is advice. Everybody around will tell you at the drop of a hat, if I were you, dear, I would do so and so and so and so. The fact is, if she were you, she would do exactly the same thing as you're doing, because she'd be you. The point, you see. So we try so hard to make decisions. Make decisions. Oh, I've got to make a decision. Oh, I've got to make a decision. Well, how are you going to make it? You're going to get it all together and put it in a pot and cook it and bake it and stew it and boil it and whatever? You're going to form it on your palette and so forth, on your easel? How are you going to make the decision? Decisions aren't made. Decisions are discovered. You see, and that's a very important insight. We work so hard. We rack our brain. Oh, I've got to find the answer to this thing. I've got to find it. All the while, we are out of the flow. We've cut ourselves off from the process. Our whole mind is blocked. This is the evidence of it. There's no way that we can find creative answers because we've blocked the flow of creativity. Emerson says, there is guidance for every one of us, and by lowly listening we shall hear the right word. Guidance is not something that somebody can give you, and guidance is not a special act of God. I think many of us have been caught up in what I call the miracle syndrome. And I use this word often because I think it's become a problem with many persons. We've picked up the word in metaphysics and in unity, and we love to say, expect a miracle. I'd be very happy if we burned up all those slogans, got rid of them entirely. Because unconsciously, whether you know it or not, the miracle syndrome is the impossible syndrome. It's the impossible dream. There's no way that this can be done. It's impossible, so I expect a miracle. A bolt from the blue. God, come and work your miracle in my life. God doesn't work miracles. God is. God is the allness of mind, the allness of life. You live in the allness of mind. You live in the whole process. It's all in you and you are in it. So if we ask God for a miracle, we're expecting God to do something for us that we refuse to do for ourselves, which is to lie low in the divine circuits, as Emerson says, and the affluence of heaven and earth will stream into you. But it's already in you. The kingdom of God is in you. It's built in. Guidance is a principle. The beautiful part of this is, and it's something that a lot of people are exploring with and gradually coming to this realization, and some people in transpersonal psychology and a lot of other fields outside of metaphysics, which we say is not only catching up to us, but in some ways surpassing us, because some of us involved in metaphysics and in truth are still using metaphysical processes to try to storm the gates of heaven. God help me. And we use a great affirmation to say, God help me. But God can't help you in terms of coming from the outside. You are a spiritual being. You have the built-in potential of the divine process within you. The kingdom of God is in you, and it's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. What more could he say? The point is, can we acknowledge the fact, and it is a fact, that whenever we face any kind of a need, there is already within the superconsciousness of us, already in the process of mobilization, the answer to that need. The whole is always in the part. There is never a time in your life and mine when we have a need for help, for healing, for guidance, for strength, for decision-making, but the answer is already there. If we can stop trying so hard. Stop racking our brain. It's not in the brain, unfortunately. If you're still thinking of the brain as a computer, as some of our people do today, then you're hung up in something that's going to be more limiting than helpful. It's not in the brain. You're not going to find it in the brain. The brain is nothing more than a receiver's set. And it deals with wavelengths that are beyond anything that human consciousness can understand. But by lowly listening, when you stop fighting, stop reaching, stop the tense, anxious struggle to get answers, and be still and know. Not be still and know that God, remember, I need this help, so give it to me. Forget all of that. Let it all go. Just be still and know. I say, if you're going to think in terms of this idea of praying to God, why don't you reverse the process and put yourself at ease and saying, God's praying for you, so take it easy. Just relax. God's praying for you all the time. That's the divine process in you, the creative intention that has no other desire except to fully expand and express through you that which is the divine seed that is implanted within you, which is you in a whole sense. So it's all there. So be still. Be still. I mean, be still, the wailing, wailing, asking, oh God, do this, help me with that, and speaking the affirmations that are directed out there somewhere. Just be still. Let it all go. Let it all go and be still and relax and really get the sense which we have to work at. The sense of knowing that if I can really let go and let, Meister Eckhart says, let God be God in you. That's the answer. God is life. We've said that. God is health. We've said it. God is love. We say it. God is substance, prosperity, guidance. We say it, but we don't always believe it. Just be still and let God be God in you. Be still and let and listen. And believe, and then act. And out of that action comes the natural flow of ideas. Any creative person, truly creative person, has this sense of oneness with the divine flow. And the scriptures say, in the twinkling of an eye, I will come. Now we've missed the story of this because we thought this means that in a twinkling of an eye, Jesus is going to come on a pillar of clouds and come and usher you into his kingdom. All these is figurative, allegorical, and so forth. In the twinkling of an eye, the whole awareness will come. I love that story of the great composer Beethoven, who we're told in one flash, heard as one chord, the whole symphony, the Ninth Symphony, I believe, and he heard it just in one flash, just It took him weeks to get it on paper. It takes a symphony orchestra an hour to play it, but he heard it all just like that. In the twinkling of an eye, I will come. The answer is already there. I suppose it would be effective and important for me to introduce or have introduced the subject so that you know where we're going tonight. Unfortunately, I haven't got a subject. Someone asked me yesterday, he said, "Oh, you're speaking tonight." He said, "What are you going to speak on?" And I said, "A platform, I hope." I find that in this type of a session or series that it is much better to kind of move along and keep within the framework of a general ideal that we've set for ourselves, the idea of living creatively, and to see where it can go. And hopefully we can accomplish some of the things we set out to. If we don't, well, we'll go as far as we can. I have personally always responded very positively to a statement that was made by Professor Lord Alfred Whitehead, very distinguished scientist and philosopher. And he was once asked, "Professor, would you tell us what are you teaching at the university?" And he said, "I'm teaching Whitehead 1, Whitehead 2, and Whitehead 3. So I guess I can hereby announce that tonight we're going to have Butterworth 2. We're commenting upon the idea of living creatively, and I've followed particularly the ideal set out by Rollo May, who says the creative person is the fully functioning person. We're thinking of creativity not in terms of people that can paint or sew or act or write music, but people who can play good music with their lives, people who have it all together. And this is the thing we're all working toward. We're all working toward the full functioning of our whole person, health-wise, finance-wise, human relation-wise, love-wise, to get it all together. I think this is the ideal we all talk about, and I think this is the thing that Jesus has in mind when he talks about, "I came that you might have life and may have it abundantly." In a sense, this evening, I want us to deal with a particular phase of this aspect of creativity, of the full functioning person, as kind of generally related to the idea of love and human relations. I think that it is very obvious that from the very first time, way back in prehistoric days, that a prehistoric creature ran scurrying into a cave to get away from the elements, and he found the cave was already occupied, that he first found himself face to face with the need to learn how to get along with others. And we've had to get along with others ever since, all the way from early pioneers who had neighbors across the prairie to days when our neighbors or nigh dwellers are very nigh indeed. We have to learn to get along. And unless a person is willing to go live in a cave, if the cave is unoccupied, unless a person is willing to live as a hermit, he's going to have to somehow find a way to get along. So that the fully functioning person in our society is a person who gets along easily with people. Not only people he loves, people he works with, but also people that sometimes he doesn't love, people that he resists and resents and have prejudices about, because all of these relate very definitely to whether his life is fully functioning. And maybe we don't like it, maybe we would resist it a little bit, but the truth is that it is impossible to know the abundant life. It is impossible to function fully as a person unless you can successfully get along with everyone. Now that's something that all of us have to work on, and it provides certainly a whole frame of reference in which to function. I think that it is imperative then that we recognize that getting along with people has very little to do with people. Has everything to do with us. It could be said, and percentages have been given, and I don't know who dreams up these crazy things, but anyway, it's something that I've heard and I've used, that getting along with others represents 2% what the other people do or think or say, and 98% what we think about and how we react to what they do and think and say. So to all intent and purposes, it has very little of anything to do with the other person. It has everything to do with the way in which you see him, the way in which you react to him, the general attitudes you hold about him. And obviously this then lays the groundwork for that marvelous, wonderful realization and spiritual principle of love. And love, unfortunately, is one of the words in the religious language that needs a constant redefinition. Love is totally surrounded by hypocrisy. Love is the classic religious cliche. Everybody knows, of course, that you should love your neighbor. And every good Christian loves his neighbor, and good Jew too, who accept the same idea, love your neighbor. So Western people know it's important, and you have to, and it's your religious premise, and it's one of the bases of society that you learn to love your neighbor. And of course, every good religious person loves his neighbor. Of course, I want to be very sure it's the kind of person I want to be a neighbor to, but I love my neighbor, you see. So there's a great deal of hypocrisy attached to it, and this is one of the things that I think practically we have to deal with in terms of trying to understand how to get along with people, not how to act like we get along with them. Jesus made it very clear that to love those that love you mean nothing if you don't love God. And you can't really love God unless you love that which is of God. And then if you deal with the realization that we've been dealing with it in this idea of unitivity, that the whole of Spirit is present everywhere, and that because Spirit is omnipresent, so the whole of Spirit is present in its entirety at every point in space at the same time, then that means that the whole of Spirit is present not just in those times when you like to feel that you're praying, not just in and around those people that you think of as, oh, she's a living doll, and he's just a genius, he's beautiful, and so forth, and that the whole of Spirit is in those, but the whole of Spirit is present in the criminal, in the rapist, and all of these things that we hear so much about, these catchwords that turn us off and bring out our hostilities and our prejudices. The whole of Spirit is present in every point in time and space in its entirety at the same time. And that's not easy to grasp. I told you last night that many of us, when we hear this principle, we can say, oh yes, that's beautiful. I realize the omnipresence of God. I agree with that. But when you get it right down into the nitty-gritty and seek to apply this to every aspect of your life, it's not quite that easy to accept. And yet I believe that's the basis of unity. Capital letter unity and small letter unity. The realization of oneness, of wholeness. We've often talked about the realization that wherever God is, I am, and wherever I am, God is, and God is everywhere evenly present. We love these things, and they're beautiful realizations. Many of them become for us in truth cliches also. Many of us become just as cliche-ridden as the fundamentalist Christian is cliche-ridden, and we have to watch this. It's so easy to pick up a new jargon and still follow the same old kind of hypocritical way of religious practice. So we have to continually challenge ourselves with the realization, do I believe, or have I yet worked it out in my consciousness so that I can accept the realization that the whole of Spirit is present everywhere, at every point in space, in its entirety at the same time. So obviously, we think we love and we think we understand love. But unless we can get that realization of love, as Fillmore says, not as the plaything of human volition, but the action of divine law. And divine law, like gravity, operates evenly and equally for all persons at all points and all places exactly the same way at the same time. Unless we can think of love in that sense, then we better face it. We don't really know what love is. We talk about it. We try to deal with it. We have affirmations based upon it. And as we so often say, well, I know the importance of loving, and I really try to love. I try so hard to love these people. Well, I have a little statement that's kind of a cliche itself, and it's a challenger. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, but it's one that I like to use as a self-corrective device. I say, to try to love is not to love. If you try to love, you don't love. Because if you try to love, it's like one of the insipid Christian words, and there are a lot of them that we've lived with for a long time. One of the words that's terribly insipid is tolerance. Christian tolerance. I am a tolerant person, which means I hate his guts, but I'm going to get along with him anyway. I mean, let's face it. This is what it means. I accept the fact that he's no good, he's a heathen, but I tolerate it. You see, these are these Christian words that we've lived with, and they're unfortunate, really, because they do an injustice to the true Jesus Christ teaching of love. So that love is not tolerance. Love is not trying to get along. Love is not just being gracious and understanding and accepting the fact that, well, after all, you've kind of got to get by with everybody. That isn't love. So love is so much more than that. So love then is not an easy thing to grasp. Sometimes we have another extreme. We think of love as something you fall into and you fall out of. And well, after all, when you fall in love, what are you going to do? And if you don't love, what are you going to do? It's just the way it is. Love happens to you, like it rains or it thunders or you get fired from a job or somebody comes over unexpected, and love happens. That's all. And quite often the happening is expressed in terms of falling in love with a person, and oh, we fell in love and it was so beautiful. Well, as a matter of fact, what we think of as falling in love, probably more than anything else realistically, is falling from love. We fall out of love. We fall out of the flow of the divine process. We fall into sensuality, sexuality, and this is a basis, and it's important, and it's not wrong. We don't mean to judge this at all. But if there's ever going to be any kind of a harmonious relationship that ensues in people who fall in love, then they better rise in love. And there's no hope for the relationship unless there's a rising in consciousness. So the point is then that we need to give a great deal of consideration to this matter of love. And it's not an easy thing to get into our consciousness. Psychologists have made it very difficult because for so long there was a great principle, which is a platitude, which is really kind of one of those things that's half right and half wrong, and because it's half right and half wrong, it's really wrong. And it's the statement that the greatest need in the life of every person is to be loved. You've heard that. Yes, it's the greatest need of every life to be loved, and we like that. You know why we like it? Because it's a good cop-out. It's a good rationalization. I know it's important to be loved, but I wasn't loved. My parents didn't love me. People don't love me. Everybody's kicked me around. So that's the reason I feel like I am. That's the reason my life is forlorn. That's the reason I'm lonely, because people don't love me. It's a cop-out. And it's unfortunate, you see, because it puts the onus of blame on other people. If other people would just love you, things would be all right. Or if you could just find the right person that would love you. Many people go through years of their life thinking, oh, someday my love will come along. Well, I hate to disillusion them. Love never comes along, because love doesn't go away. It doesn't come and go. Love is a divine flow, not the plaything of human volition, but the action of divine love. So, to really get an understanding of love, I think we have to realize something that really knocks to bits all of the romantic myths that have carried around for centuries. I can't give you anything but love, says the song. The fact is, there's one thing I can't give you is love. I can't give you love, you cannot give me love. It's not a commodity to be exchanged. There's no way I can give you love. And there's no way you can give me love. And if we wait for that kind of love from one another, we'll wait for a long time, or else we'll settle for a lot less than real love. We get involved in sex and sense and all the exchanges that we have that butter us up and kid us and delude us. But still, we're just as empty of love. Why? Because the only way you can be loved, or I can be loved, is from within ourselves. We've said God is love. We believe this. It's the one definition of God in the Bible. So certainly it's a very valid position. God is love. And where is God? Is God to be found out there somewhere? We've accepted the idea that God is a process that flows through man. The kingdom of God is within man, totally and completely. Seek first the kingdom, and then the things will be added. Love is within. Love is an inner force. It's an inner flow. And when we awaken to the awareness of this inner flow, then we're loved from within. It's not just, some people have struggled over the idea of loving yourself, and it's very hard to love ourselves because we thought of this as egotistical. We thought of standing outside and buttering ourselves up and so forth. But it's a matter of being in tune with this divine supportive process of love and letting ourselves be loved from within. Or as Meister Eckhart says, let God be God in you. And when a person is in a consciousness of love and he feels that tremendous sense of love support from within himself, then the interesting thing is his relationship with another person creates an atmosphere. And in that atmosphere, the person feels secure, and he feels himself easily receptive to a love flow from within himself. He lets down his guard. The only reason anybody lacks love is because he frustrates love. That's the sin we talked about yesterday, the frustration of potentiality. He frustrates it. He holds it back. He has bitterness. He has enmity. He has feelings of lonely. He's feeling sorry for himself and so forth. And so he's stewing in his own juices because he's cutting himself off from his own flow. But when one person gets into this flow of love and radiates this consciousness of love, he loves himself and becomes loving, creating an atmosphere of lovingness around the other person, the object of the love or the object of the friendliness. That other person suddenly feels relaxed, lets down his own barriers, releases his own frustrations, and lets love flow through him. So two people who think they're giving each other love are actually in the company of one another, feeling secure enough together so that each is allowing the love of God to flow in him and through him. Now, in a sense, you could say this is just playing games with words. It means the same thing. To a certain degree, it does, except that a person may be entirely on his own, living in the midst of an environment or a situation where he knows nobody, has no friends, and so forth, and feels terribly empty and devoid of love. There's no one in all the world that can keep him from experiencing the greatest sense of love except himself, right where he is. And the person who awakens that inner flow of love is a person then who gets along easily with everyone, because he's in the consciousness of love. Now, this is a very, very simple thing, and yet it's a very profound and a very important thing. Because when it gets right down to it, then the idea of trying to get along with people basically is a matter of making sure that we have control of our own lives. You see, the unfortunate thing is, most of us have grown up in an attitude that life is purely an outside-in experience. And if you have happy friends, if you live in a good neighborhood, if you're surrounded by congenial employees and employers and co-workers and so forth, then you can be friendly and happy. But people say, well, how on earth can you feel happy and peaceful and loving in this group of people? It's terrible. So then you lose control of your own life. And we've tended to assume that there's nothing you can do about this. What are you going to do? That's the kind of neighborhood I live in. That's the kind of people I have to live with. What are you going to do? You have to live with the kind of husband I have, the wife I have, the friends, the family, the children who don't respect me. What are you going to do? That's the kind of experience I have. So of course I feel terribly frustrated. So we've tended to assume that conditions and circumstances and people on the outside can influence and direct our lives. I don't know if I've mentioned it to folks here or not, but there's a beautiful little story that I love that was related by Sidney Harris, a news columnist in the Chicago Tribune, I think, and he's been one of my favorite columnists for years. And he tells a story of visiting a very beloved Quaker friend, and he stayed with him for several nights, and every evening at a certain time, according to ritual, this Quaker friend would go down to the corner store, a newsstand, to buy a paper. And so he'd accompany him, and they'd have a conversation along the way. And when they get to the point, he'd talk to the newsman, and he'd say, hello, how are you? It's a great day, isn't it? How's business today? And the newsman would always very curt and gruff and sarcastic. Wow, what kind of a day it is? And he'd always have some sort of a very curt reply. So after seeing this a couple of times, Sidney Harris asked his friend, he said, you're always so kind to that fellow. Why do you express such loving ways to him when he's so nasty to you? And the Quaker said, and I think it's classic, he said, why should I let him decide how I'm going to act? Now that's the key, you see. The fact is, most of us, unconsciously, allow people to decide how we're going to act. And we justify it. We say, well, of course I'm upset. You'd be upset too if you had this so-and-so to deal with. But that's no reason. Maybe I would be upset. But if I'm upset, it's because I've lost my focus and I've gotten out of the flow. And I'm losing control of my own life. And it's so very important then to take control and to realize that the means for the fully functioning life is all within the person. It's not out here in the world. It isn't in finding the right person. It's in being the right person. It's not in getting into the right environment. It's getting into the right state of consciousness. And if one is in the right state of consciousness, he has control of his thoughts, control of his emotions, then he simply deals with things as they come. No matter how people act or react, he's perfectly peaceful and composed because he's in control of himself. You might say, well, goodness, it would take a Jesus or a Buddha to live that kind of consciousness. It takes a lot of doing. But then what accomplishment in life doesn't take a lot of doing? If you want to be a pianist, you've got to practice. Even if you want to learn to type, you've got to practice. Anything that's worth doing takes a lot of effort, and we expend a lot of effort in doing a lot of things in our lives. People spend hours and hours learning how to play golf, learning how to do needlepoint and knit and all these things. We want to do it, and we spend time and we work and work and work to do it. Why shouldn't we spend time in taking control of our own lives, which is probably more important than anything else? It's the thing we all hunger for. But somehow we kind of think that I would have a happy life, I would have a wonderful life and a fulfilled life if I could just be in the right place, if I could have the nice congenial people around me, if I could just go to the right community, if I could get a different job, if I could find new friends. And we entertain this illusion, this never, never land, which never really fulfills itself. It never comes. It can't. Because the control must always come from within ourselves. So this then is the basis of trying to understand this matter of love. Love is a flow of the divine process, a divine energy that's totally within yourself. And you always have the choice and make the determination and set the degree to which you love, to which you express love. You may say, how can I be loving this? One person will say, in fact, I had a letter from a radio listener some time ago, and I think I cited this little story briefly in my book, In the Flow. She wrote and said, you were talking about love and the idea of loving everyone. She said, I just can't do that. How can I be expected to love everybody? And when we begin to see it on that basis, then we see the importance of practice. And then we see the importance of taking a careful look at every individual situation in our life that causes us concern. Every person that disturbs us. Every bit of prejudice that lurks in our consciousness. Looking at it carefully and continuously and probingly. And looking at it from the point of view, this thing that exists in my consciousness is keeping me from controlling my life. It's putting me actually under the domination of forces outside of me. As long as I hate someone, I become a slave to the person I hate. As long as I entertain these deep-seated prejudices, I never am able to achieve any kind of fulfilling life or peace in myself, because always I have that lurking in my consciousness. Do I want to live with that? Do I want to take control of my life? If I do, then I must be willing to face up to it. Not to try to convert the 2%, because that's a very minute percent, but to convert the 98%, which represents the thought people of my own mind. That's why Jesus says, agree with your adversary quickly. The adversary is always your adverse reaction to the person. The adversary is not out there. You never have an enemy out there. You have enmity in your consciousness. You have adverse attitudes. You have hateful thoughts. You may justify it. You may go all your life and saying, the reason I feel so bitter is because of what he did and what she did. This woman who was knocked over on the subway could spend the day and the week, and as she was starting right off to do, before we had some long talks later, she was starting off to let this be a justification that we live in a world of animals. That was where she was at that time in consciousness. And then she was saying, why did this happen to me? Why did she do that to me? And so I told her a thought which came out of the hard knocks experience of my own consciousness in trying to deal with some things. And that was, you'll never find an answer to that question unless you're willing to get the fish hook out of the way. And the fish hook is the to me. That's your own paranoia sticking out. The feeling that people are against me. And so she just proves that people are against me. Why did she do that to me? Cut off the to me. And unless you're willing to cut off the to me, you're going to spend the next days or weeks or months or years with this terrible grappling hook hanging from your flesh, bleeding along the way, because you're carrying this hook. And the hook is all of your own making. Cut off the to me and then ask the question again. Not why did she do it to me, but why did she do it? And you should ask the question. You should. We should try to understand these things. But you can't understand it as long as you're filled with this paranoid feeling that she did it to me. She singled me out. She got up that morning and she said, I'm going to find the first woman that comes along and I'm going to knock her flat on her face. That's what she did. She planned it right from the start. Have you ever heard people, you never said this, but have you ever heard people standing in the line at a bank? You say, wouldn't you know it? That man right in front of me, he's doing all of his business today just because he knows that I'm late and I need to get ahead of him. Aren't people thoughtless? Isn't it terrible the way people are? That's our paranoia. We all have it to a certain degree. We might as well face up to it. So now the question is, why did she do it? And the interesting thing is, if we can let ourselves, and it's just a matter of let ourselves seek to understand really, objectively, why she did it, our whole thought, even our words, have a little different ring. And we find that very quickly a kind of a compassion slips in, and we find ourselves thinking, well, obviously she didn't do it on purpose. Obviously she wasn't thinking. She may be a thoughtless kind of a person, and she probably got up on the wrong side of bed, or maybe she has a husband that beats her, she's going off to work, and she's afraid she's going to be late, and all these things. She didn't do it to me, she did it. But she didn't do it to me. And suddenly I can let it go. And then I can do what in my heart of hearts as a truth student I know that I should have done all the time. I can bless her. I can say she needs my blessing. And as a matter of fact, she did me a favor. She did me a favor because She caught me in a situation where I obviously was off guard or out of focus, or I wouldn't have drawn it to me in the first place, and I wouldn't have got upset about it in the second place. So the fact that I got upset about it showed that I was out of the flow of love. So therefore, she helped me to know that I was going into a day totally off base. And if she hadn't knocked me over, I might have been knocked over by 10 people or hit by a truck. So she did me a favor. She awakened me to my senses. She helped me to realize that I was out of focus. So therefore, if I really were alert, and you wouldn't want to do this too often, people wouldn't understand it, but if I really were in the consciousness of the love process and grateful the way the divine activity works in my life, I would have gone before her and I would have bowed low to her and I would have said, I want to thank you very much. Now only a saint would do that, of course, and anybody else would be labeled a kook. But in consciousness, if we're trying to understand Jesus' thought, love your enemies and pray for those that despitefully use you, that you may be sons, which means that you may keep yourself in the flow, then any time a person seems to cause you to be upset, it's as we said last night, it's because you're upsettable. It's because you were out of the flow. It's because your thoughts were confused, because you did not have control of your life. So then don't blame the other person. In fact, be grateful to him for giving you an object lesson in the next step for you if you're really interested in working to take control of your life. Now you say that's idealistic, that's ridiculous, how can anybody live like that? You can live any way you want. And an awful lot of people want to live under the shadow of paranoia. An awful lot of people like to think, they do this and they do, isn't it terrible the way those people act, the way they live? You know, many people want to live that way, and if they want to live that way, God bless them. You have a choice, and he's made his choice. But the point is, if you're tired of living that way, and if you have a desire to really take control of your life, you can, at any time you want, no matter where you are. Not after you move away or get a divorce or change jobs or go to far off Tahiti. Any time along the way, you can take control of your life, take control of your thoughts, agree with your adversary, get your thought in the flow of love, and let the consciousness of love flow forth to keep you in perfect peace. Then you move along through all of these situations. They may still be there, but they don't really exist as threats to you. And more than that, suddenly you become a part of the solution of the world problems rather than being a part of the problem itself. If we talk about the cumulative effect of consciousness, we may as well admit it. That a person who has enmity is just as much a part of the negative consciousness of the world as the person who is the enemy. The person who resists and resents the wrongs that are done by others is just as much a part of the negative pall of gloom that hangs over society than the person who commits the wrongs. The person who does the raping and the mugging and the stealing and all these things, the person who is terribly incensed by this terrible immoral way that people live, is just as much a part of the negative consciousness of the world. And that's stern stuff. And that's the kind of stuff that in the scriptures they said, and people turned and followed him no more. Because many people don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear the fact that potentially every person has control of his own life and can do so, and when he does so, then he becomes a part of the controlling forces of the world in a positive sense. And the only way you can be any kind of a helpful influence in the world is to take control of your own life, and then out of that control to become a radiating influence of love. And now the love no more is a cliche. It's not, well, I try to love these people, because if you try to love them, you're simply covering up a lot of resentment. To try to love is not to love. Stop thinking about what they do to you or to the world or to your neighborhood or to your friends or to the people in your office, and start thinking about the 98%, the thoughts within you, and get control of those thoughts. And then begin to look upon every situation as an opportunity to be a little more loving. Now love is no longer a cliche. It's a dynamic power, and it becomes a tremendous influence. I had an experience on the subway in New York City, one of the rare times. I don't ride the subway very often, but this particular day I was riding the subway, and it's an interesting experience, certain times of the day. Especially in the rush hour. Sig will tell you. I see Sig over there smiling. It's quite an experience. They have the subways that get so crowded you just can't even stand. You couldn't fall over, we'll say that, because you'll be propped up from every side. And they push people in at the doors, and they have people that stand there at the subway terminals, and their main job is pushers. That's their job, to keep cramming you in so they can close the door. And you're just tight like sardines. It's an experience, especially in the hot part of the summer with no air conditioning and maybe not very many deodorants around. But one day riding the subway, it was one of those times when the subway wasn't very crowded. And I sat there and I began to look into the face of a young lad across the way and down a little bit. He was quite young, probably 11 or 12. I don't know what age he was, but he was young, pitiful. You just looked at him and you felt that he was stepped on, kicked, beaten, unloved, just the most pitiful creature that you could imagine. And one of those few times I found in my life, I'm not very demonstrative, but I found myself almost compelled to get up and go over and put my arms around him and just tell him it's not that bad, that you're loved. You know, I didn't do it. Obviously, people wouldn't understand. He probably would be insulted and frightened. And I didn't have the courage to do it anyway. I might as well face it. But then I suddenly realized that really wasn't what was necessary. I didn't have to demonstrate that kind of love, which could be misconstrued and maybe would be an ego trip on my part anyway. If I really felt that I would like to share or express or radiate some love for him, this was a good opportunity for me to get myself in tune. So we were riding on the subway for a while, and I thought would be a good exercise. So I closed my eyes and just tried to get a realization of being one with the divine flow. Felt very peaceful and very beautiful. And it was a great experience. It was something I'll never forget. And I opened my eyes again. I looked at the young man. I just looked at him. And I looked very probingly at him. And I found that suddenly he looked different. He wasn't quite the same. And then his eyes looked up, and his gaze met mine. And for one fleeting instant, we looked into one another's eyes. And then his face broke into a little smile, and I smiled back. And that was all. 30 seconds later, it was his subway stop, and he got off and left. I'll never see him again. He'll never see me. And yet, somehow, I feel that in that moment, there was communication. Wordless communication. I know it was a great influence to me just because of what it did to me in terms of my own growth, but I have a feeling, maybe it's an idealistic feeling, maybe I want to feel that, but I have a feeling that something happened to him, that maybe his life will never be quite the same again. And I think this is something of the tremendous power and potential that is in love. It's not demonstration, not being demonstrative, not outwardly saying, I love you, I put my hand around you. How many wives or husband or children have their parents or their in-laws or whatever constantly tell them they love them and yet actually feel devoid of love because they don't feel it's sincere. They feel it's perfunctory. There's a lot of that goes on in our society, and I guess we do a lot of it too. It's a part of being gracious and so forth. But he didn't need that demonstration. It was just a moment of communication. And I have a feeling, maybe in a mystical sense, that this is the true namaskar, the Hindustani word, which is the divinity within me salutes the divinity within you. And there's a communication. And I kind of feel that this is basically the key to the sort of communication that so often breaks down in our lives. We talk a lot about communication, and there are books written on the art of communication and effective communication and how to win friends and influence people. And it's kind of strange and a kind of a commentary on what's going on in our society. I don't know if you've noticed it, but recently among the bestseller lists for months now, there's at least been one book on the idea of how to take command over other people, how to force your will on people, how to get them to do what you want to do, and all these things. These are books that are making the rounds now. I don't know what it means. It's some sort of a strong reaction in the consciousness of people. And it's sad, you see, because basically the need is not to take control of other people, not to convert people to your way. Many people think of the idea of making friends as converting them. And, it's selling your point of view till eventually they like you and then you become friends, and he becomes your friend as long as he remains converted. When he becomes unconverted, then that's so-and-so. After all friendship I gave him, look at the way he's treated me. This is that beautiful thought of, I think, Sonnet 116 of Shakespeare, who says, love is not love which alters when it alteration finds. That if you think you love a person, and then when he becomes unlovable, you stop loving him, then you never really loved him at all. You see, you only had what Eric Fromm calls symbiotic attachment. And a great deal that passes for love and friendship and the acceptance of people is in this particular area. After all I've done for him and he treated me like that, that's terrible. I hate him. Well, the fact is you're simply telling a lot not about him but about yourself. Telling a lot about the fact that you were never really loving him. Your friendship was based purely on convenience. It was based on the fact that he was becoming a part of the dangling chain of friends that you could wear around your neck. And I think many people like to feel, oh, I love my friends. My friends are the most important thing in my life. And they're also the most important possessions and the things that possess them. And that person obviously is often the person who's more often hurt, because one of these friends dares to say something unkind after I befriended him. It's terrible. What an ungrate, and so forth. Well, actually, the whole process indicates that the friendship was a convenience. It was an accommodation. It was a possessiveness. It's important, I think, to realize that love communication is the only way to understanding. So often we're trying to get along with people, trying to get along with our boss, or trying to sell something to someone. We say, I want to try to get through to him, but you can't get through to that guy, I want to keep on, and I'm going to, as we sometimes say, I'm going to set him right if it's the last thing I do. And sometimes we say when somebody gets angry or dares to oppose us, we say, I'm going to straighten that person out, you see. And there's that tendency of trying somehow to affect changes in the world out here, we think, in order to bring about peace. There's no peace that way, ever. There's no inner security. There's no fulfillment. There's only the moment of temporary conquest, which makes you the victor, like the person sitting in the seat, smug and glum, and yet knowing in her own heart that she got it at the cost of being a human being, you see. And obviously she would suffer ultimately in her own self if she had any feelings at all, which she probably did, you see. So that the important thing is, if you want to communicate with someone, there's only one way. And that's to engage in a sense of communion. There's no communication otherwise. Think of the time when a committee of labor and a committee of management sit down to do some hard bargaining. There's no way that there can be any real communication unless there is an awareness that God is on both sides of the bargaining table. There's no way that you can communicate with your boss if you're trying to talk about a raise in salary or to get along with a co-worker or a loved one and whatever, unless you're willing to know that the whole of Spirit is present in its entirety at every point in space. So the whole of Spirit is present in that person. The whole of Spirit is present in me. I give thanks that means oneness, because we're both in the flow of love. We're both one with love. Now I can communicate him in the realization of wholeness, the whole of me dealing with the whole of him, and then we have understanding. And there's never understanding without that. There's never any real communication. There's always a case of somebody giving in, putting across a point of view. There was a time, I think we're beginning to see a backlash of this. There was a time when, shortly after the Second World War, when everybody had this idea and the government had this idea. We've got to get around the world and sell our point of view to everybody. And we thought that was the right thing to do because we felt right about our point of view. But you can't achieve unity or world peace by pushing, forcing, or even coaxing your point of view in the mind of other people. It's not a point of view, but it's a point of contact that makes for peace. And now we're beginning to find that around the world we don't have any friends at all. None. We work so hard. And in trying to sell our point of view, we gave money everywhere, supported everybody and everything. Everything that we thought could accept our point of view, and wound up with no friends. Which is a good lesson, if we can learn the lesson. But it's an important thing in terms of our own human relations and our human feelings. So often we try so hard to be liked and to be loved and do so many things. Parents do this with their children, giving them too much, giving them privileges. We do this to people. We take them to dinner. We lavish them with affection and everything else because we're trying to convert them into a friend, you see. And in the end, we wind up with probably somebody who hangs on as long as we keep doing the things. When we stop doing the things and begin to feel that he's just taking me for what I'm worth, then we say he's an ingrate. He's not at all. He's being exactly what we accepted him as being. We made him, and that's the way he'll be. He'll be that kind of a person in our life as long as we go on. That's hard. But the important thing is that eventually we have to awaken to the realization that if we want to take control of our life, if we want to have any kind of control at all over our environment, over our relationships, even over the world in which we live, then we've got to begin to take control of, which means to take responsibility of, the thought people of our own mind. So then this principle, wherever Spirit is at all, the whole of Spirit must be, and because Spirit is omnipresent, the whole of Spirit must be present, equally present, in its entirety, at every point in space at the same time, is a very important principle. Not an easy one, but it's an important principle to work with, you see. Now, I think this leads us, and I'd like us just take a couple of minutes to think about this. This leads us basically to a need to understand the basic of prayer and meditation. Because essentially, love is the best example of the way in which prayer works. Maybe it's the best object, maybe it's the best means. And I think there is more misunderstanding, lack of understanding, confusion about the subject of prayer than anything else in religion, including the religion of Unity students. Because we tend to assume that prayer is one of those words that is self-evident. So we say, "Dear, you must pray about it." And we think, as Unity students, that if we are simply convinced, if people tell us long enough that if you pray about it, you solve every problem, that that's the end and all. But what is prayer? What does prayer mean? Prayer means all things to all persons. People pray in all sorts of state of consciousness. You know, I say this, and I say it full well knowing that it might be misunderstood. But one of the things that I dread is whenever we get into one of those times when from the top, for instance, the President of the United States says, "I think we'll have next Wednesday as a national day of prayer for peace or for something or other or for reconciliation." I cringe at this. Maybe there's something wrong with me. I cringe at it. Simply because much that passes for prayer is concentrated worry. If I had a problem, I would want the right people to pray with me, and I believe in the supportiveness of prayer, but I wouldn't want to tell everybody to pray for me because I have a problem. Because maybe a small group of people would be praying supportively, and the rest of them would be praying out of a negative consciousness, thinking how terrible it is. "Oh, dear Lord, help this poor, miserable, suffering person. Isn't it awful? He's so sad. Oh, it's terrible, the thing that he's going through. Thank you, God. Amen," you see. That kind of prayer I don't want. That kind of prayer our world doesn't need, you see. And again, I freely say that that's my own hang-up about such things as worldwide prayer. But there's a great confusion about prayer, and especially the prayer of love. Glenn Clark used to talk about the idea of shooting a person with bullets of love, and it was a beautiful thought, a beautiful ideal. And in a sense, I suppose it could be said that's what I was doing with this young boy on the subway. But it also could be construed to be taking a lot of affirmations of, "I love you, I bless you, I know that you're God's perfect child," and just throwing these things at him over and over and over without ever getting to the root of my own consciousness. Quite often, much that passes for unity prayer and affirmative prayer is lashing a person with affirmations, trying to set him right, trying to correct him, trying to change him, without accepting him. To me, the goal of prayer is not that we can set the world right or set people right, but that we can see it rightly. And if we do not come to see it rightly, then our prayer is nullified itself. I may be praying all the high-sounding phrases and all the beautiful words. I may have memorized every truth affirmation that Unity has ever put out, and I may say them in a constant stream out to this person. But if at the same time I cannot see him with eyes of love, then I nullify my own prayer. The interesting thing is the word "I" comes from the Hebrew and also the Sanskrit root word ayin, A-Y-I-N, which literally means fountain. That seeing has always been, to people who are aware of the process of the Spirit within men, has always been a flowing fountain that flows forth out. That when you see, something actually goes out of you, and you project and radiate. And the poet says, "That thou seest, man, become to thou must. God if thou seest God, and dust if thou seest dust." Things become what we see them as being. Life becomes the way we see it. We become as we see ourselves, because sight is a fountain that flows. And what you are, as Emerson says, meaning what you see, thunders so loudly that I can't hear what you say to the contrary. If you're speaking words of affirmation, but still seeing pain, seeing conflict, seeing disorder, then you're speaking out of both sides of your mouth, and your prayer consciousness is nullified. So I think that it's good to get just a simple insight into, I think, an important fundamental in prayer. This is why I stress, and I've been talking to the ministerial students in the morning, and I've been stressing this to them, that I believe that one thing that we lack in our beautiful, beautiful unity approach to prayer, and it's a lack only because we haven't listened very carefully to the teachings of Charles Fillmore, is the basis of starting our prayer in a consciousness of oneness. First of all, be still. First of all, the silence. First of all, go into ourself. Turn away from the situation. Judge not according to appearances. Get the consciousness of oneness. Get into the feeling of love. Release the frustration which is set, the blocks in my own conscience set by my resistance, my resentment, which I try to counteract by affirming the truth for it. But getting into an inner awareness where I can let that flow of love come in me and get myself established and centered in love. Once I feel peaceful, once I've let it all go, once I've dissolved my enmity and my hatred and my bitterness and my thought, that animal so-and-so that knocked me down, I've let this all go out of my consciousness and feel a sense of peace, then you're ready to pray. Because then you have something to pray from. You see, as I say, prayer, carrying over from the old traditional belief, we've tended to pray to God about the situation. And I always shock people by saying, get rid of the middleman. Stop praying to God about it, because God isn't up there anyway. But we create a straw man up there, and we pray out there hoping that God will solve this problem, which gets us off the hook. You see, we're involved in enmity. We have the bitterness. We have the inner frustrations. But God, please solve this thing so I won't be bitter anymore. So we pray to God about the situation. Emerson says, when we have broken with the God of tradition and destroyed the God of our intellect, then God fires us with his presence. So I say, and this is stern stuff to a lot of folks who unconsciously still have their God out there, exit out. Get rid of that. God is a presence in whom you live and move and have your being. A presence that is forever within you as the base of your life, as the root, the source. And the only way from the point where you stand and in the desires of your heart that you can do anything constructive for this person is if you can get yourself in perfect peace and let love flow forth out of your consciousness. So I say, first of all, get still. Dissolve this thing. And if you can't dissolve your enmity and your attitude about it, your fear of it and your worry of it, then don't pray for it. Ask somebody else to pray for it and pray for yourself. Work on your own statue and your own consciousness. But take time to get still, get into the consciousness of oneness. And then out of that consciousness, then you're ready to speak the word of truth. And the word has power. But the word has power because it comes out of your consciousness of the flow where the power really begins. And here's an illustration. It's one that has great meaning to me. If you take the example of an archer standing on the target line ready to shoot his bow at the target. He has a bow in his hand, and it's a stern thing. And there's a physical principle involved, which I won't go into. He has an arrow in his hand, which he carefully selects, and the arrow is carefully created, and he takes great pride in having the arrow true and straight, and having the feathers all right, and the tip just right, and so forth, well balanced. He puts the arrow in his hand, and now he stands, and the goal is to shoot the arrow from here to the target. And if he went about that in the way in which most of us, because of the influence of our traditional background, go about affirming the truth for someone, he would take the arrow and try to flick it out. Or he would try to throw it out with his own power, with his willpower. He wouldn't go very far. Boom! Probably 5 feet, 3 feet out in front of him, go with a plop. He wouldn't anywhere near get near the target. But he's an archer, and he knows the process involved. He wants the arrow to go to the target, but the first thing he does is pull the arrow back. And he pulls it back, and back, and back. Crazy, because he wants the arrow to go that way, and he's going this way. He pulls the arrow back as far as he can possibly pull it. When he gets to the point where he can't pull it anymore, then he stands steady for a moment. Then he redirects his aim and gets it just centered. And now, what does he do? Just lets go. And the arrow goes straight to the target. And I liken this to the very important preparation in prayer, which is so often overlooked. The preparation of getting still, freeing ourselves from anxiety, going into this means forget about the problem. Stop praying about the problem. That's why Emmett Fox used to say, don't think about the problem, think about God. That's the important thing. Get yourself in the consciousness of God. Get yourself centered. You can't pray for anybody constructively as long as you're anxious, concerned, troubled, worried, fearful, insecure, and so forth. There's no way that you can pray for that person. I don't care how many affirmations you throw at him. You may beat him over the head with cosmic clubs, and you'll get bruises on your hands, and he might have bruises on his head, but you cannot solve problems in this way. The important thing is be still and know that I am one with this divine flow. Get into that consciousness. Sometimes that's all you have to do, because you realize really the problem was your own attitude rather than the other person. But even if it is a very serious problem you're sincere about solving, when you get that consciousness of inward peace, you see, which comes from drawing back, now you've built up a tremendous energy. And now you take your affirmation, and you simply look at the person. He looked on him and blessed him. And you let it go. There's no force anymore. There's no, oh God, I'm one with God and the divine supply is manifest in my life and I'm protected and so forth, which is all willpower, all out of human consciousness. You just let it go and whisper it. And your affirmation is almost a case of, thank you, Father, that this is the truth. And I release it. And then, because you have centered yourself in power, then you fulfill the realization that Jesus states when he says, the words I speak are not my words, but the words of him who sent me. Maybe the same affirmation, but now the affirmation is transformed and transcended. And now it becomes the word of truth. So that these literal verbalisms that you say have no power in themselves, but can become a marvelous conduit if you're in tune. If you're not in tune, they're nothing but words that you lash the world with. But if you're in tune and you let it goes straight to the target, and it goes not actually by sending something to the person to set the person right, but because you are seeing the person rightly. As we said Tuesday night, I was dealing with Butterworth 2. This is Butterworth 3 this evening. And we're dealing essentially with a number of facets of the idea of the art of living creatively. And as I've mentioned, I'm using the word creative as Rollo May uses it when he talks of the creative person as the fully functioning person. I'm concerned, as I'm sure we all are, in trying to find the kind of life where we can truly live and not exist, where we can come alive, where we can bring our life to full focus, bring our enthusiasm to full flame. This is what abundant living is all about. It's not a matter of just adjusting to things and making the best of things and learning to get along. It's learning to expand and grow and unfold and really awaken our divine potential. We're all interested in this. And tonight I'm going to challenge you, hopefully, in an area that is so fundamental that it becomes almost a part of a cliche process in the teaching of truth, and this is in what is sometimes called the idea of demonstration, or the art of demonstration, and the demonstration of prosperity, and the demonstration of health. Maybe, in a sense, what I'm going to suggest is that we scrap the word demonstration, and that we find an alternative. I have a feeling that, unfortunately, because of the tremendous needs that are so often apparent in our lives, and because of the hope that people have always had that in some never land, some great magic formula will come to change all things in life, I have a feeling that sometimes we have missed the fundamental principles of truth because we've been involved in playing games with magic. And the word demonstration actually comes from the root demon, demonstrate. And it goes back into the early days of chicanery and sorcery, and where they pulled magic things out of the air and made fire shoot out of their hands and so forth. And it's not a very good word, really. I know we'll never change it because we're so ingrained in it and it's so much a part of our unity and metaphysical literature. But I certainly suggest that we at least take a new look at it, get a new insight into the process. Because actually we've tended, I think, in our work in truth to think of God as a magic worker, and that if we pray right and use the right affirmations and get the right formulas, that somehow we can stir God up and he will work his special magic for us in some way. And this is why I suggest so often that maybe, even though I know the people who sell and create these slogans probably wouldn't like me for it, I would like to see all of the bumper stickers that say "Expect a Miracle" put on one heap and burned up in one great flame. Because I don't think we should expect miracles. I think if we expect miracles, we're expecting demonstrations. We're expecting all sorts of fantastic things to come from the outside and to come from the heavens. We're expecting God to do for us what actually we need to do for ourselves, or let God do through us from our own inner flow. And there's a good illustration of this, which I like to deal with. I think it's always been very challenging to me, and it's found in the 6th chapter of John. As a matter of fact, you'll find it in all of the Gospels. It's one of the very few stories or experiences of Jesus that every single Gospel writer gives an account of. And this is the so-called feeding of the 5,000. Now actually, if you ask the average person to tell the story of this feeding of the 5,000, he'll almost invariably say, this was the time of the miracle demonstration. This is the time of the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes. And I say, go back to the Gospels and reread it. Reread it in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. And you will find not one iota, not one trace, not one suggestion that the loaves and fishes were multiplied. Now that challenges you. You probably all run to your Bibles tonight. I hope you do. The point is, what it does say is that when the disciples told Jesus that the people were hungry, should they go to town and buy food, they were in the thought of the limitation of supply. He had them gather what they had, and they had 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and he said, have the people sit down, and they broke the loaves and fishes, and he simply passed it out. Now this doesn't say that there was not enough food or that they just all had a teeny little mite. They probably were all fed to full, fed to complete fulfillment. But the important thing was, and this is a very important insight, the people were not aware of any demonstration. Nothing magic happened. And again, go back and look carefully at that story and look at the rest of the chapter of John, and you may be amazed. First of all, ask yourself, if Jesus had multiplied the loaves and the fishes, can you imagine how many loaves and fishes it would take to feed 5,000 people? Not only that, but it says 5,000 people, not counting women and children. Look at the percentage of women and men here tonight. So there were probably 15,000 people there, or maybe more, you see. Just imagine the mountain-high pile of loaves and fishes that would be there. If that had been the demonstration that manifests, can't you imagine that that would be the one single event in the whole biblical recording that would stand out? Because they always wrote about things that they remembered. These stories, the Gospels were written many years, 10, 20, 30 years after all of this happened, and they remembered those things that were noteworthy. They would have remembered this. There was not one suggestion that there was any multiplication and great demonstration of substance. As a matter of fact, if you read on in the 6th chapter of John, I don't know how many of you have ever tied this together, but read on, the same chapter, you will find the people come to Jesus and they say to him, our fathers ate manna in the wilderness. Show us a sign. What have you done? They were not aware of anything happening. Go to your 6th chapter of John tonight and read it. Don't take my word for it. You may be surprised. Now what am I saying? Am I saying that we've been hoodwinked, that this didn't happen? No. But I'm saying that this goes to the heart and root of the whole demonstration process in supply. We've tended to assume that the demonstration of supply meant the magic formulation of money, the division of money, the magic means of money coming from all sources, God putting money in our bank accounts and all sorts of things. And we've thought of money as a source of limitation rather than a symbol of substance. And the beautiful aspect of this, and this is the heart and root of the metaphysics of the process, that substance is non-material and substance has no quantity. Remember, we've been talking about what I call the principle of unitivity. And this is that wherever spirit is at all, the whole of spirit must be. And because spirit is omnipresent, the whole of spirit must be present in its entirety at every point in space. Every minute cell contains within it the allness of infinite substance. Every loaf, every bit of fish contained the allness of supply. All of it, not some of it. And it didn't have to be magically multiplied. It simply had to be used. Now, it's hard for us in human consciousness to understand because, as we're told, spiritual things must be spiritually discerned. But the interesting thing about this is that certainly in our experience, people do go hungry. There are times when people have a need. And Charles Fillmore had a deep insight, a very strong awareness when he said it's a sin to be poor. In other words, he felt that it was right that every person develop an awareness of the divine flow so that there was always substance of supply for him. Not that he had to go out and get it or have somebody to give it to him or in some magic way have it manifest, but that every person is in the flow of substance. The whole of infinite substance is manifest in its entirety where he is at every point in time and space. Can you understand that? As a matter of fact, few of us can, really. It's almost beyond knowing. But this is the secret awareness of the truth that is between the lines in all the teachings of Jesus. And we miss that idea if we play games with magic, if we try to manipulate and so forth. Obviously, as we say, people go hungry. People have needs. People experience lack, just like the prodigal son who went out into the far country and came to no want. But the wonderful realization that is shown in this parable of the prodigal son is that when he came to himself, everything changed for him. When he came to himself, and this was a parable, you see, so it was dealing with an essence of life. When he came to himself, he very quickly found himself reunited in the consciousness of oneness with the Father. And then symbolically, the story says, suddenly he was showered with blessings, eat, drink, and be merry, for my son who is dead is now alive again. This is the process that always works in us when we break through the limitations of consciousness. And for many of us, money has become a symbol of limitation. It's a symbol of limitation, as the loaves and fishes were symbols of limitation to the disciples. We only have. How much money do you have in your pocket right now? You pull out your money, you count it up, and I would dare say that practically every single one of us, by the preconditioning of the limitation of substance, would say, well, I only have $10.32, and I only have $100.29. I only have $2 million in the bank. You know, it's sad that some people only have, what's the man who passed away recently? $2 billion. That's all he had. I mean, it's terrible. Money is a symbol of limitation to most persons. And the only way that we can get a new awareness of this consciousness of substance that Jesus talked about is to break free from the limitation of substance and get in the sense that substance is a divine flow within us. Jesus says, seek first the kingdom, the inner awareness, contact with the divine flow, and the things, in terms of the symbols and the money and the jobs and the loaves and the fishes, will be added. They will manifest. This is not magic. This is not demonstration. This is not sorcery. This is not manipulation. This is no miracle manifestation from some outward source. This is consciousness unfolding. And that, I believe, is what truth is all about, and it's a very significant and very important realization. Now, the interesting thing about this feeding of the 5,000, is that there is a tendency to put it onto such a basis of magic that we take it totally out of the realm of practicality and reality. Most of us, if we are in need of something, would probably assume that even if we were working demonstration or even if we were praying for an unfoldment of supply, we would assume that in some way, in our economy at least, there would be some money involved, right? That something would happen, something would come. So that George Lamsa, who was a Bible scholar, a Syrian Bible scholar, who made some very provocative, insightful suggestions, I think, and contributions to Bible study in terms of knowledge of the idiom, asked a very pertinent question about this feeding of the 5,000. A question that few biblical scholars had ever asked, or at least they had very carefully refrained from asking because it was too embarrassing. Because in the story it says, afterwards, when all the people were fed, it said they gathered up 12 baskets full of food. And Lamsa simply asked the question, where did the 12 baskets come from? If they had no food, no supply, where did 12 baskets come from? And so Lamsa suggests, as a conjecture, and any person's thought or analysis of this is as good as any other, he suggested what is more of a demonstration or a manifestation of divine supply than that some merchant in the town in a divine appointment at that moment began to realize, well, we've got all this food on hand and those people are out there and it's food time, lunch time, meal time, and they're hungry, and I am in support of Jesus. I'm not able to be there, so why can I not make my contribution? And up comes a camel train loaded with supply to feed the people. Now, some say, I won't listen to that. That's taking away God's miracle and God's word and so forth. Well, it doesn't make any difference. But the point is we've tended to assume that consciousness does not deal normally and naturally with the experiences of life. As a matter of fact, Jesus says to his disciples, "Go forth without scrip or purse." And so we think then of Jesus going about the land with his band of disciples. Usually he probably must have had himself and at least 12 others, and there were probably dozens of others that were following, and maybe even more than that. And the fact is that in places where they stayed, when they came to an inn or had needed food and so forth, there were times were not just on a matter of barter and exchange in those days. You still had to have money to pay for things. And I wonder if you've ever noted a little insignificant statement in the Scriptures, in the Gospels. Probably another one that's either never been looked at or it's been conveniently swept under the rug. For it says of the disciples and Jesus in their travels, quote, "Certain women among them ministered unto them of their substance." And you know what that says in the modern vernacular? A couple of well-to-do ladies picked up the tab. And what is wrong with that? One of the aides to Mahatma Gandhi in India, who made a political career out of living in poverty and went about with his little spinning wheel, and lived with the bare necessities of life. One of his aides said, scratching his head, "Boy, it takes an awful lot of money to keep Gandhi living in poverty." And there's nothing wrong with that, you see. That's the important thing. We need to get a healthy attitude about the outer manifestation of substance and out of the relationship of substance to the divine flow. To go forth without scrip or purse means to go forth without the restriction and the limitations of money and substance. After all, I only have. You don't only have. You have your relationship to the divine flow. And it will go as far and as broad and as wide and be as affluent as your consciousness, as your faith, as your awareness. Fillmore says faith is the perceiving power of the mind. The faith to actually see and form and shape substance. Substance which is a divine flow, substance which is always present. Now, we think in terms of work as the means by which we make money. And we say, well, after all, if a person wants money, he should go out and work for it. And he says, I've got to go to work because today I have to make money. And every time I hear somebody say, I'm going to work to make money, I say, well, then I guess you either are a counterfeiter or you work for the U.S. Mint. I don't know any other way to make money. There's no way then, you see, that you make money in your human experience. You manifest substance through the contact that you make with your work. But the unfortunate part is we tend to see this all wrong. We think of going to work to earn another dollar and another day. And actually the reverse is the true. But it's hard because we've so long deluded ourselves. In this country, and in the state of Kansas and all around the Middle West, I'm sure most of you are well aware of and either fearful of or delighted in the great electric storms that you have in certain seasons of the year, when you have big bolts of lightning that come crashing down from the sky. And there's nothing more awesome to see a huge bolt of lightning come down and strike a tree, and the tree explodes, and you see a big fire as a result of it. I wonder if you've ever been aware of the fact that this is a total delusion. That the lightning you see doesn't come from the sky, but it comes from the earth back up to the sky. That any scientist or physicist will tell you that what actually happens is a tiny little leader bolt comes from the sky, from the cloud, comes down, makes contact with the tree or the house or the lightning rod or whatever, and then in that contact there is a channel that is created, and then the tremendous voltage of the earth comes up through the tree, shattering the tree in the process because the tree is not able to carry that voltage, and then it goes radiating back up that little leader bolt, and the lightning that you see is actually coming from the earth to the sky. Now, I don't know what that means. I mean, it's a little bit of physics that I'm sure you'll put away in your pocket and remember forever. But the important thing is I think it has a very close parallel to this matter of working for supply. We think we go to work to earn money. Actually, a very real principle is involved. Here at Unity School they used to, and I hope they still do, on the pay envelope, and it might surprise you that spiritual workers in organizations still receive pay. They may go forth without scrip or purse, but they get a paycheck anyway. And in the upper left-hand corner of the paycheck, they used to have here at Unity School a little thing that said, I look to God as the source of my supply, and I give thanks to Unity School as a channel through which it manifests. But I look to God as the source of my supply. Now, this is a very important key to the prosperity principle in relationship to work. Many people think of the need to look for work where I can make more money. And as I say, okay, become a counterfeiter. You're not going to make more money in any job, you see. The important thing is to get into the consciousness of the flow of substance. Get the realization, work on it. This is something you do in yourself. It doesn't matter what the economy is, or what the jobs pay, or what people say, or what you read in the Wall Street Journal. The important thing is you get the realization that wherever you are, the all of substance is. And because substance is omnipresent, the whole of substance is present in its entirety at every point in space at the same time. So right where you are, not out there in the job, but before you even go to the job, you are in the flow of divine substance, all substance. And there is no greater flow of substance in any person, in a billionaire, than there is in a pauper. There's no greater flow of substance through the consciousness of Jesus than there is in every individual person. Jesus said, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. This is what he was pointing to, how even such a thing as a tiny little flower is in the flow of divine substance. It doesn't worry about it, doesn't go off to work to get it. It just is, and it releases substance as it is needed. Now this is a very important insight. So then what is work? If work is not a place to make money, work is a place to make a life. The important thing is each of us is a creative creature, and we cannot actually fully function as persons without work. So we should not think of working to make money. We should think of our supply coming from an inner source, and think of our work as an opportunity to project that creative flow and give our life meaning. And when we think of this, then we'll never again see the spectacle of the person who looks for work and then he stops looking for work when he finds a job. If you know what I mean. In other words, he's looking for a place to get on the payroll somewhere. And he gives his resume and he tells all the great things he can do, but the moment he gets the job and gets on the payroll, then he makes himself scarce. He's not concerned how much work he does. But the person who realizes his inner flow of supply, as the Unity School pay envelope used to say, and maybe still does, it still do that? Does. All right, good. I'm glad. Praise God. But anyway, it says, I look to God as the source of my supply. I am in the flow of supply. I begin with the realization that I'm one with the divine flow. Now I need a contact. I need a means by which I can project this consciousness into the world. And the contact is a place of work. Therefore, I look for a job as a means by which I can give my consciousness. I can pour out my creativity and allow the substance come into manifestation through the flow from within myself. This is what every employer is looking for, praying for, and I guess sometimes thinks he rarely gets. Because he doesn't want somebody on his payroll. He wants somebody to help him do his work. He's not looking for someone to give money to, or to give security to, or to give old age pensions to. He's looking for someone who will actually lend creativity and substance in the process that he calls the corporation or the company that he's with. It's true that many persons, even within the structure of corporations, are not aware of this, but this is a vitally important thing that is absolutely imperative if our economy or the world's economy is going to survive in the passing years, when the great needs for the fluctuations of substance and needs and so forth are going to manifest increasingly. But it's an important thing for every person to realize that we're not then going out and praying for some demonstration of supply, something that's going to manifest out here where I can find the job that's going to pay me $1 million. And I don't know, many people like to read these stories about how I prayed for supply and somebody came along and gave me a job and I made $1 million and so forth and all these magic things. Well, it's not that these things don't happen, but the stories are misleading. Because it seems that all I have to do is kind of pray for some kind of magic. I love the realization that God can do no more for you than he can do through you. It manifests through your own consciousness, through the expansion of your own awareness. I long sometimes to read in those stories that say I prayed and I got $1 million job. I long to hear it outlined what the person did in a creative sense to actually justify that kind of money. Because if he doesn't justify it in terms of his own creative expression, then according to the law of consciousness, he doesn't have it. To him that hath shall be given, from him that hath not shall be taken away, even that which he hath. A person may win a windfall in the stock market, he may win the lottery and may get a great deal amount of money and say, praise God, I prayed and God worked a miracle for me. But if he doesn't have the expansion of his own awareness, if he doesn't have a greater awareness of the flow of substance flowing through him, he'll not long have it. Some way it'll fritter itself away. because it cannot really be an outward expression if it's not a part of his inward awareness. Now that's important, because I think it helps us to understand something of the prosperity principle. So the important thing then is that every person is in the flow of substance. It's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. You have the whole universe as your support and supply. That's what Jesus says when he talks about consider the lilies of the field and the birds of the air and so forth. Do not have nests wherewith to lay their head, and yet actually the Father cares for each one of them. This divine support is always moving within us. The only reason then that we fail to manifest the supply we need is like the little boy who suddenly realizes he's trying to help his father, and he's watering the lawn, and he says, "Daddy, this old hose doesn't work." And the daddy looks at him and he says, "Well, it would work fine if you'd stop standing on the hose." And most of us are standing on our own hose. Most of us have what I call mental cholesterol. We have the incrustations of the channel or the flow within ourselves, which are the result of worry and fear and self-limitation and all the ignorant attitudes that we have gained, most of which we hear from television or get from the prognosticators that tell us that we're going to have a bad year and this is terrible, times are hard, you can't get a job at your age, and all of these things, that we develop mental cholesterol. And our consciousness then becomes narrowed and constricted, and so the flow of substance in our life manifests accordingly, and we're standing on the hose. There's no one to blame for it. We say, well, I guess it's the way it's hard times, so what are you going to do? Hard times has nothing to do with the flow of supply. The outward times, the economy, simply manifest an outward expression of the collective consciousness of people. But any person at any time can be in the flow of substance. Any person at any time, even in the middle of a battlefield, can be in the flow of divine protection. Any person even in the middle of a lonesome room or a crowd of hateful people can still be in the flow of love and have a tremendous fulfillment of love. It doesn't make any difference. Each person is a manifestation of the divine flow within himself. That's what Jesus' teaching was all about. I and the Father are one, not two, one, whole, complete, each one an individual expression of the divine flow. Now, this manifests, I think, in an even more effective way and certainly more meaningful way for many of us in terms of what we call health. And again, there is often the thought of the demonstration of health. Praying for health, praying for God's miracle to be done. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, and this causes some of us to feel uncomfortable because we say, well, I believe in spiritual healing. I believe that God can heal me. So do I, except I would change the phrase a little bit. I would say God can't heal you. God has already created you whole, which is another matter, you see. If God has to heal you, then you're kind of expecting that God somehow sat idly by while you got into trouble, or maybe he caused the sickness in the first place. So that often the prayer for healing is the prayer that God will change his will. Oh, God, have mercy on me and do your miracle in me so that I may be healed. God has created you whole. What more can he do? That's why I always say God has already done for you all that he can ever do. Don't expect him to do any more. No point in asking God for anything. That'll get some questions afterwards, I'm sure. But the point is, each of us is created in God's image likeness. Each of us is in the flow of the divine process. The kingdom of God is within you, and it's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. What more do you want? The thing is, we need to break through the mental cholesterol. We need to open the channels. Healing comes from within, not from without, not from God putting his hand magically upon us and some miracle happens, some great demonstration of fire coming out of the heavens and so forth. Lots of people describe it in this way, and there are lots of emotional experiences that seem to demonstrate this, but that's not a part of the teaching that you and I are involved in. We're trying to realize the divine flow of life that comes forth from within, that life is a natural process. Health is natural. Remember, Myrtle Fillmore said, I'm a child of God. I don't inherit sickness. That was the awakening for her. She realized that I am already created in God's image likeness. It doesn't matter what happened out here, whether all my family have been tubercular as she was living out into expression, or whether I've had this contagion, or whether I've been working too hard and my heart is oversized and whatever. All of these things are physical outward manifestations, but each of us is in the flow of the divine process. Some interesting things are happening in the field of medicine. There was a time when medical research and the average medical doctor was concerned when a person was ill in finding or tracking down what he called the focus of infection. And when he found the focus of infection, then he would use antibiotics or whatever to try and correct it and counteract it. He was concerned with trying to find where the harmful bacteria were and then try to destroy the destroyers. And that attitude still prevails to a certain degree, but actually a whole new concept is coming into the field of medicine, where they're tending to deal with people in terms of what is called the whole person. The realization that actually each patient is a process, each person is a process of the awakening and the unfoldment of a divine idea, which is replete with all the methods and the means. It's all built in. Everybody has the built-in potential for wholeness. So the question is that a lot of medical researchers today are asking, not from a metaphysical point of view, but it certainly justifies and vindicates a lot of metaphysical concepts. The question is not where are the harmful bacteria, but what is it that caused bacteria that are, as they would call, saprophytic on the surface to suddenly become parasitic? What causes harmless bacteria to suddenly begin to attack others? What causes a person who suddenly has a normal whole condition to suddenly experience what we call illness? What is it that caused it? And in every case, the research is beginning to prove that it's something in the attitude, something in stress, something in the feelings, something in the mental cholesterol. So the word cholesterol in its physical usage, I think, is very apt, because actually the great cause of all physical deterioration is a construction or a constriction of the life flow within the system, where the arteries and the veins and the whole arterial system do not convey the flow of the substances of the life properly, and then we have what we call age, deterioration, and ultimately death. And for a long period of time, hopefully we're gradually getting out of this in the medical field, for a long period of time, medical doctors, strangely enough, assumed that life is a process of slow dying. And the reason that they felt this is obvious, because from the very beginning times of anatomy and physiology and the study of life, they have studied cadavers. And in the new School of Medicine at Cornell University, they're becoming aware of this. And now they're no longer interested in what makes sick people sick, but what keeps healthy people healthy. Doctors never asked this before. This is looking on the other side of the coin. Because as long as the doctors and the research were engrossed in the sickness and what causes the sickness, they were ultimately plagued with the realization that every person is a potential cadaver. And all we can do is kind of postpone it a little bit. I mean, that sounds terrible, but this is true, and this is what medical researchers today are coming to realize. And theologians always thought this too. When I was a youngster, I used to do a lot of singing, and I worked my way through school singing for funerals. And I heard an awful lot of preachers. And the one thing I heard more than anything else was the preacher's rationalization. From the day we're born, we begin to die. So life is a constant process of running out, of running down, like God set us out like a toy and wound us up, and then we just keep running down. And so people go to the doctor to see what their aches and pains are, and the doctor looks them over, and he says, well, after all, you do pretty well for a person of your age. What do you expect? You want to live forever? You know? So you're in the process of running down. You don't have as much as you had before. You have less. But this is not true. And more people in the field of medical research are coming to realize this. There is actually no reason medically why a person ages or deteriorates or dies. No real reason. There are lots of excuses. No, there's no such thing as death by natural causes. That is no longer valid. A person doesn't just naturally get old and die. There's some cause, there's some restriction, some obstruction somehow. And the more we realize this, the more we begin to work on the kind of things that are going to release this mental cholesterol and allow the free flow of consciousness. And this is what our study of truth is all about. Not to work miracles and get involved in magic mumbo-jumbo, demonstrate the life health so that some magic formula will work health for me, but so that I can actually release the block, stop standing on my own hose. And if there are certain conditions in myself that are the result of certain things I'm doing, whether I'm eating wrong or worrying too much, then I've got to correct those things. No magic formula, no affirmation, no bolt of blue from the sky is going to be any fulfilling healing experience if I don't correct the causes within me, and the causes are mental and emotional. Most medical doctors today know this. More doctors, I'm sure, send patients to ministers to find some spiritual solace than ministers ever send to doctors. I mean, there's no doubt about it today, because most medical people throw up their hands and say, you know, as a matter of fact, I know a doctor in New York who's a very close friend, and he's actually a very outstanding diagnostician. But he says actually his diagnosis in most cases is what he calls GOK, and it's God only knows. And he said, frankly, if most doctors were honest, they would all say this, that most of the medication that is given is experimental. It's a matter, well, give him something, anything, and in some cases give him sugar-coated pills. Won't make any difference. The fact is he's ill because he thinks he's ill because he wants to be ill, and there's a certain hypochondria involved. And this is true in the majority of cases, and more medical people are realizing this. And so if the person goes to the doctor, the very fact he calls him up and goes down and has his opportunity, sits down before the doctor, there's a kind of a pastoral ministry that takes place. And just because he's there and the doctor looks at him and looks in his mouth and so forth, it's almost like he's praying for him. He gets a healing right there, just because he believes that the doctor can heal him. And if he doesn't have that belief, then there's very little that the doctor can do for him, no matter what he gives him, you see. So it's important that we begin to get a new awareness of the divine flow in man, to realize that each of us is a living expression of this infinite process. I think that one of the great, definite, limiting influences of our time is this age deterioration syndrome. The idea that after all, life takes its toll. I've heard so many people say, well, I don't really feel so good, but you know, I'm so many years old and life takes its toll. What do you mean? Do you have to pay a premium to live? You go through a toll gate and have to drop your quarter in every once in a while all the way along through life, and you keep paying your toll and eventually you run out? You know, I mean, this is sort of the attitude that has prevailed. Consciousness is a very important thing. We've always said, and it's become a cliche, that you're as young as you think you are. The important thing is that no one ever really grows old. A Midwestern doctor once was a woman doctor, and she was asked how she was able to grow old so gracefully, which is a horrible thing to say to anybody. And this medical doctor replied in a very caustic way. She said, you don't grow old. When you stop growing, you are old. So life is a growth process. And so the problem is today, in recent years, in the Western world and predominantly in America, we have given an unusual amount of time and have become overly preoccupied in a morbid sense with age under the guise of the cult of youthfulness. We have tried to keep young. Now I say in my book, Life is for Loving, a thought that has always been a very blessing to me, I say to try to love is not to love. Nobody ever loves by trying to love. And I say the same thing in youthfulness. To try to be young is not to be young. To try to be young is to be old, because the more you try to be young, the more you're in the consciousness of resisting deterioration. You may do all the things that a lot of people today do. You may make the plastic surgeons rich. We have a friend in New York who's a plastic surgeon. We call him Mr. Snip and Stitch. He says, well, I had Mrs. Jones in today, just snipped a little and stitched a little. You know, you erase the wrinkles and all the various things and so forth. And if you want to make the plastic surgeons rich, and they get very rich, then fine, you try to be young, and you patch it up and pick it up and take off the wrinkles and off the bumps and so forth. But always there is the same consciousness within, you see. The fact is, we've allowed ourselves to become so influenced by this cult of youthfulness. We do this in our magazines and so forth. All the models and so forth are the slim, trim, youthful creatures, flat-chested and everything else, you know. Young people, that's all. Everybody wants to be young. But the thing that we fail to acknowledge is that life is a process of growth, not growing old, but growing up. We have this great paradox. We tell our youngsters, why don't you grow up? And then we spend half of our life trying to be like he is. And we make all the cosmetic companies rich by buying all the things, the hair creams and the potions and all the things to try to make ourselves appear young, and yet we think that there's something wrong with him because he doesn't grow up. Life is a process of growth, not growing old, but growing in consciousness. As a matter of fact, in the East, especially in India, a concept that prevailed up until comparatively recent times and still is a great influence and is a very marvelous one, is the idea that life is lived in 3 stages. The first 40 years of a person's life, he's in the process of maturing. And actually, he's not adult until he's 40, not even supposed to speak in the presence of his elders until he's 40 years old. And the next 40 years of his life, he makes his creative contribution in terms of his work life. And in the next 40 years of his life, he gets involved in spiritual growth. And then when he gets to that point of these 3 stages, then and then only is he ready to live. Then he's ready to fully function. Now that's a beautiful thought. But strangely enough, it's a thought that is being entertained by a lot of people today. You ask the modern gerontologist, and he'll tell you there's no reason why the average person should not live at least until 120 years. No reason today, with all that's available and so forth. There's no reason. If people do not live to 120, it's because of inertia, it's because of limiting attitudes, it's because of cholesterol and mental cholesterol and all of the things that intrude upon our life. But the important thing is, and this leads to a whole new area of need and of concern, and this is the area that we call retirement. This is something that man has never really come to face up to yet. People spend most of their lives thinking, well, when I've lived out my life, then I will retire and spend my retiring years, or the quiet years, or the salad, not the salad years. What's the term I'm thinking of? I don't know. The which? The declining years. That's the word I was reaching for. I will spend my declining years with ease and comfort, you see. Well, the fact is that most persons, especially men, because men usually are the ones that have the idea that their work is their life, that when the company takes away their work, they lose their life. They don't live very long. They don't live very long in retirement. The life age in retirement is, the deterioration, the lifespan of retirement is very minimal today. Any insurance company will tell you that. Simply because people have conditioned themselves to believe that you're only alive as long as you're working. But we're coming into an age, the age is already upon us, and we're not facing up to it because we have so many other problems we're looking at, when actually people are going to spend the majority of the years of their life in what now we call retirement. The majority of the years. This is the danger of people going off to retirement homes. Nothing wrong with a retirement home, but a retirement home so often is put out in the middle of nowhere. It has all sorts of recreational people, but recreational facilities, I should say. And as I talking to a man recently, he was a very marvelous man. I think actually he was a building contractor or something, and he said his wife's been trying to get him to go to a retirement village, and he went out to the village and spent a whole day and sat around, talked to the people and sat there. He came back, he said, I'm not going down there. Nothing but old people there. I don't want to be with old people. And this is a very important observation, you see, as long as we isolate ourselves, and this is a thing where I think a lot of people these days have been misled by enterprising real estate agents trying to sell property, to sell these retirement villages, to get people to go out and live with them. But how you're going to spend 50 years? Just imagine, if you're going to live forever, and most of us are, you're going to spend 50 years sitting there on shuffleboard courts? And this may well hit some people here between the eyes, and you'll probably pillory me for it, but then that's what I usually do anyway. But this is a very important thing that we're going to have to come to grips with. Certainly, corporations may, and increasingly are, setting limiting standards so that people have to retire at a certain age. But no one, no corporation, no person, no federal law or anything else can cause you to retire from the flow of the universe, except you. And if you get out of it, it's because you are out of it in your own consciousness. You may feel that life has passed you by, but life has passed you by because you refuse to be a part of life. I love that prayer of the old Scotsman. Oh Lord, keep me alive as long as I live. As long as I live, let me live fully. And that always calls to mind our beautiful Charles Fillmore. Here was a man who was alive as long as he lived. Eric Byrne once had an article in Life magazine a number of years ago, and he says, fully enlightened people only have three basic words: yes and no and wow. And that always reminds me of Charles Fillmore. It's that enthusiasm for life. And a number of years ago when I was watching, as I know many of you were, watching the space probe and the men getting on the moon and all this sort of thing, and we're so excited at this great age and this marvelous achievement that we've done, I could just imagine Charles Fillmore standing on the top of his chair, waving his hat in his hand and saying, wow! Because this was a man that was vital and alive and interested in all things, interested in life, enthusiastic about life. That's what life is all about. Here was a man who was alive all of his life. It's the important thing. People say, well, after all, it's ridiculous to talk about living forever or living to 120 years. I mean, everybody can't live that long. It doesn't make any difference. Again, we're back into the hang-up of thinking of life and thinking of spirit in terms of quantity. It doesn't matter how long you live. It matters how deeply you live. You can live 1,000 years and drag along in an empty existence, and what does that gain you? The important thing is to be alive. So whatever a person is in state or station, wherever he is, whatever his experience is, it's important that he keeps in it, with it. And that's something he has to do. He goes back to school. He keeps his mind alert. He studies truth. He practices. He's involved. He reads everything that's going on. He's excited about things. We think that the reason we lose our enthusiasm is because we're getting old. But actually, the reverse is true. We're getting old because we lose our enthusiasm. And the loss of enthusiasm comes first, you see, because we tend to begin to think, oh, well, you know, I've had so many trials, and I've worked so hard, and I've raised my family, and I've had all these difficult things, and I'm just tired. Well, the point is, stir up the gift of God that is in you and get a new start. Build a bonfire under you. Listen to Eric Butterworth once in a while. He'll put some daggers under you. I mean, that's my feeling. Get alive, get alert, wake up, live. When I left the city of Detroit a number of years ago, this is a marvelous experience. I mentioned this in my book, In the Flow, and I just mentioned it in passing, but it's something that's made a deep impression upon me. It was about 15 years ago when I left the city of Detroit, and obvious as is always true when a person is a minister or a teacher, you have a kind of enthusiastic following, people who worship at your feet and all this sort of thing. Anyway, I was leaving and people were crying, and this woman came up to me and she said, "Oh, Eric, I'm so sad to see you go, but I just kind of feel I want to do something for you." She said, "You're going off to New York. Is there anything I can do for you?" Jokingly, mind you, jokingly in passing. I said, "One of the things I'm going to miss, I read the Detroit Free Press, and they have a column by Sidney Harris, and he's one of my favorite columnists. And in New York, he doesn't appear. The syndication doesn't reach there in any of the papers. Why don't you send me Sidney Harris's columns?" I was joking. 15 years have passed. This woman has clipped out every single column. Every single column. She's kept them together, neatly cropped, put them in a manila envelope every single month, never missed a month. In 15 years, I've received in the mail that mailing of the columns of Sidney Harris. And she's done that purely because of her desire to be alive. She has not in any way imposed upon me. She never encloses a letter to get free advice or free treatments or anything else. Never. She's never any one time mentioned a thing. She just does it. Every once in a while I write her a note, tell her how much I love her and how much I appreciate this. And then if she ever does respond to my letter, she says, "Oh, I'm so grateful that you let me do this." Because she says, "I kind of feel now that for many years I've been one of your research assistants. And it's just been a wonderful job." She says, "It just gives me the greatest thrill." She says, "When I hear things you're doing or read things," and now I send her, of course, a lot of the things that I do and send her books and so forth. She says, "Occasionally I read little inklings that I just know were influenced by some of the stuff from this column." And it was. I love the guy. I mean, after all, he's a very challenging, insightful person. This is not a tribute to Sidney Harris. It's a tribute to a woman whose practice was the will to keep alive, to keep in it. And I haven't seen this woman in 15 years, but I just imagine that she is radiant and alive and probably looks as young today as she did when I saw her the last time. I'm sure she does. And she was at retirement age 15 years ago when she started doing this. I'm saying that, not that we all clip this type of article out of the paper or clip coupons or clip anything else. The important thing is that you get involved, that you get with it, you get into things, and that whether you're 9 or 90, that you right now today begin to plan for the realization that you're in the flow of life and you're going to have a life of activity and a conscious experience of enthusiasm. You're going to be with it and stay with it. And I think that is one of the most important prerequisites of this idea of living fully, creative living. Living fully in the awareness that the life I have is the life of God manifesting in me, and it never runs out. There's always enough. There's always enough substance, there's always enough life, there's always enough love, there's always enough creativity, there's always enough to do the things that I need to do, because wherever I am, God is, but wherever God is, the whole of God is. And because God is omnipresent, the whole of God is present at every point in time and space at the same time. So the whole of God, the whole ball of wax, is present in me as my divine potential. And I didn't say it, Jesus did. He said, "The kingdom of God is within you." God bless you.